Close your eyes and let us travel back in time, not to a specific year or a documented day, but to a feeling. We arrive in the quietest hour. It is the deep breath the world takes just before the dawn. The sun is not yet a fire on the horizon. It is only a promise, a whisper of warmth on the cool night air. The darkness of the world has softened to a deep and gentle grey. The moon, a sliver of forgotten pearl, hangs in a sky of velvet. We find ourselves inside, in a room of profound stillness. The air itself seems to be sleeping. It carries the cool, clean scent of stone floors and the faint, dry fragrance of papyrus scrolls. These scrolls rest in their wooden cubbies, their stories held in silent slumber. Light has just begun to find its way through a high, unshuttered window. It is not yet a beam, but a soft diffusion, a mist of silver that touches everything with a gentle hand. It illuminates the motes of dust that dance in a slow, eternal ballet, each a tiny world turning in the quiet air. Below, a mosaic floor depicts a forgotten myth. Its colors are muted in the dimness, its figures content to wait for the sun to bring them back to life. A single bronze lamp, its oil spent, stands like a patient sentinel. On a small wooden table, a simple clay cup holds the last of yesterday's cool water. This is a moment suspended. It is a world holding its breath, waiting for a signal. The great city that surrounds this room is a ghost of itself, a collection of sleeping shapes and silent streets. The sounds of industry and empire have not yet begun their daily chorus. There is only this perfect, unbroken peace. It is the peace of a world waiting to be born again with the coming of the morning light. But this perfect stillness, this held breath, cannot last forever. It is a fragile vessel, and the first sound of the morning is a tiny crack upon its surface. Far away, somewhere in the labyrinth of sleeping lanes, a rooster cries out. His call is not a sound, but a shape, a sharp, bright ribbon of noise that cuts through the grey air. It is the first word spoken in the new day, and once spoken, it cannot be unheard. The silence that follows is different now. It is an expectant silence. Soon, another sound joins it, a deep, resonant thud from a bakery down the street. It is the sound of a wooden paddle striking an oven door. Then comes the soft whisper of embers being stirred back to life. A thin thread of wood smoke rises into the cooling air, carrying a promise of warmth and bread. It is a scent that travels on the morning breeze, a ghost of nourishment winding through open windows. The light itself begins to change. The silver mist warms into a pale golden wash. The eastern sky, once a uniform slate, now bruises with shades of lavender and soft rose. Long shadows are born from columns and doorways, stretching like lazy sleepers across the cobblestones. Another sound arrives, closer this time. The scrape and clatter of a heavy wooden shutter being pushed open. It is a domestic sound, a simple, human sound. It signals a single life stirring, a single family beginning its day. Below, on the street, the first footsteps echo. A lone pair of sandals on stone, a steady, unhurried rhythm. Each of these small events is a note in a symphony that is just beginning. The great city is turning in its sleep, preparing to wake. The quiet heart of the empire begins to beat, slowly at first, but with the steady promise of the immense, powerful day to come. And now the sun crests the 7 hills. It is no longer a gentle wash, but a defined presence. Sharp, golden shafts of light cut down into the narrow streets, chasing the last of the deep blue shadows into hiding. The light paints the world into full view. It warms the plastered walls of the tall apartment buildings, turning them the color of pale honey. It catches on the iron grills of windows, making them gleam like dark jewelry. It spills across the threshold of the bakery, from which the scent of fresh bread now rolls out like a warm, invisible river, a fragrant invitation to the waking city. The sounds have begun to weave together into a more complex harmony. The lone footsteps have multiplied into a soft, steady shuffling of countless sandals on stone. The slow, rhythmic rumble of a wooden cart joins the chorus. Its wheels complain against the uneven basalt blocks, a familiar and dependable morning song. Voices begin to emerge, low and gentle at first. A quiet greeting between two neighbors passing in a doorway, a soft word spoken to a child. From the public fountain at the corner, the musical splash of water into a stone basin becomes a constant, refreshing pulse. The air itself feels different. It has lost its nighttime chill, replaced by the first hint of the day's coming warmth. The gentle peace has not been broken. It has simply changed its shape, evolving into the quiet, purposeful hum of a world beginning its work. Each small ritual is a thread being woven into the grand and intricate tapestry of a Roman day. The great loom of the city began to work in earnest. The golden threads of sunlight now reached deep into every alley and courtyard. They illuminated the faces of the people who were the city's heart. A man with hands like worn leather unbarred the front of his small shop. The wooden shutter lifted with a familiar groaning sigh. From within, a new scent joined the morning air. It was the dry earthen perfume of pottery and the sharp, clean fragrance of dried lavender bundled in twine. The shopkeeper moved with a slow, unthinking grace, a dance he had performed 1,000 times before. His motions were a silent story of his trade. A few doors down, a woman swept her stone step with a broom made of twigs. The rhythmic scrape was a gentle, percussive beat in the day's unfolding song. She paused to watch her neighbor, a baker, hand a warm, round loaf of bread to his first customer. The coin that passed between them was cool and smooth, a small, heavy sun in the customer's palm. The murmur of the street grew richer, layered with new sounds. The soft clinking of glass from a tavern being cleaned. The low voices of men discussing the day ahead. The light, quick footsteps of a boy sent on an errand, his bare feet making almost no sound on the worn stones. The morning air, now fully awake, carried these details like a careful messenger. It delivered the scent of watered herbs from a window box and the distant metallic tang of a blacksmith's forge, not yet fiery, but preparing for its labor. These were not the grand, loud noises of empire. They were the small, essential whispers of life itself, a quiet and intricate machine assembling itself for the day. Each person, each small task was a vital and necessary part of the whole. The city was breathing now, a deep, slow, collective breath. The thousands of small, separate sounds began to lose their sharp edges. They blended one into the other, creating a low, city-wide hum. It was the sound of a great hive awakening. If you were to listen from a high window, you would no longer hear a single footstep or a solitary voice. You would hear the gentle murmur of the whole, a sound like a distant, placid sea. Below, the narrow streets were becoming gentle rivers of people. A current of humanity flowed steadily toward the city's heart. There were men in simple tunics carrying their tools. There were women with empty baskets heading toward the markets. Their movements were not yet hurried. They were measured and rhythmic, a slow walking tide. The colors of the morning deepened. The pale gold of the first light now blazed from the marble of distant temples. Rooftops glowed, becoming a vast and intricate mosaic of red and brown tiles under the strengthening sun. The air grew thick with a rich brew of smells. The scent of baking bread was now woven with the sharp, green smell of herbs from market stalls and the sweet perfume of blooming jasmine from a hidden garden. From the grander houses, a thread of smoke carried the scent of expensive incense offered to household gods. It was a complex fragrance, the very essence of the city's life. The day had arrived not with a sudden crash, but with a gradual, inevitable swelling of life. The quiet, solitary peace of the dawn had been replaced by a shared and purposeful calm, the calm of a world that knew its work and was ready to begin. The great machine of the city was now fully engaged, its countless gears, once turning slowly, now meshed with a confident and steady rhythm. The gentle hum had solidified into a constant, resonant drone, the deep and unwavering sound of 1,000,000 lives moving in concert. On the main thoroughfares, the arteries of this living giant, the slow streams of dawn had become broad rivers of determined activity. Heavy wagons, their wooden axles groaning a low song of effort, rumbled toward the city's core. They carried the raw materials of empire, massive blocks of stone and tall stacks of timber, moving with the slow, inexorable power of glaciers. They carved their paths through a sea of people that parted and flowed around them. The crowd itself had a new character, a new energy. The slow, ambling shuffle of the first hour had quickened into a purposeful stride. Men in formal togas, their white wool a stark and brilliant contrast to the earth tones of the street, walked with an air of quiet importance. They were headed toward the basilicas and the Senate House, the places where the fate of the world was debated in calm, measured tones. A detachment of soldiers marched past, their armor gleaming like polished bronze under the high sun. The rhythmic clap of their leather sandals on the paving stones was a steady, percussive beat, a quiet reminder of the discipline that held this vast world together. The air was now thick with the fine dust of the streets, a pale gold powder kicked up by 100,000 feet. It caught the light, creating a hazy, luminous atmosphere that softened the sharp edges of the monumental buildings in the distance. The smells of the city had woven themselves into a dense and layered perfume. The savory aroma of hot oil and grilling fish from street-side kitchens mingled with the sharp scent of tanned leather from a saddler's shop. This was layered with the cool, damp smell of stone and water drifting from the entrance of a newly opened public bath. Far off, from the direction of the great public square, came the faint, intermittent clang of a hammer on metal, a sound that spoke of commerce and construction on a truly vast scale. The day was no longer a promise whispered at dawn. It was a powerful and vibrant reality, an engine of immense complexity, turning with all the purpose and energy of the capital of the known world. All the streets, all the rivers of commerce and life flowed into one vast sunlit lake of stone. This was the great public square, the lungs of the city, where it drew in the world and exhaled its power. The morning sun, now high in a sky of perfect, cloudless blue, beat down upon the endless expanse of marble paving. The light was so bright it seemed to have a sound, a high, silent hum. It made the statues of past heroes and forgotten gods seem to squint down at the living tide below. The constant drone of the city found its focus here. It became the sound of 10,000 conversations happening at once, a murmur so immense it felt like a physical presence. This great voice was punctuated by sharper notes, the rhythmic call of a vendor selling sweet figs, the clear, insistent splashing of a monumental fountain, its carved figures spilling cool water into a wide stone basin, the low, persuasive tones of a merchant trying to sell a bolt of Tyrian purple cloth, its color so deep it seemed to drink the sunlight. The air itself was a market of smells. Here the simple scent of bread was lost in a dizzying cloud of more exotic fragrances, the sharp, salty tang of olives in brine, the earthy perfume of truffles from a northern forest, the warm, sweet cloud of cinnamon and clove that clung to a spice merchant's stall. These smells mingled with the clean scent of water from the fountains and the warm, dusty smell of the sun-baked stone. To stand in this place was to feel the pulse of the world. It was a place of overwhelming scale and energy, Yet everything had its place. The flow of the crowd, the arrangement of the stalls, the sounds of business, all followed an unseen, ancient rhythm. This was the city's heart, beating in the bright, warm light of midday, a testament to its boundless, organized vitality. But even the most powerful heart must slow its rhythm. The sun, having climbed its great celestial hill, began its slow, golden walk down the other side. The fierce, white glare of noon softened into a warmer, more forgiving light. It was the color of old honey, a light that seemed to hold a memory of the day's heat. Across the vast marble floor of the square, the shadows were reborn. At midday they had been hiding, little more than dark smudges at the base of columns and statues. Now they stretched out like long, cool fingers, painting dark, gentle stripes across the sun-warmed stone. A quiet change came over the great voice of the square. The immense roar of commerce and conversation began to fray at the edges. The relentless energy of the morning had been spent. The human tide which had poured into this space for hours now hesitated, turned, and began to ebb. People started to drift away, not in a rush, but with the slow, unhurried pace of those whose work is done. The tide flowed outward, seeking the cool promise of the great bathhouses or the shaded quiet of a covered walkway. The sharp cries of the vendors softened, their voices weary from a long day of calling out. The complex tapestry of smells began to thin. The heavy scent of spices and cooked food gave way to the simpler, cleaner fragrance of stone and water. The air itself felt lighter, the thick, dusty heat of midday dissolving into a more breathable warmth. The city was taking its first, deep, restorative breath of the afternoon. The engine of empire was throttling down, its thunderous work complete for now. It was a slow, collective sigh, a moment of transition from labor to leisure, a timeless ritual repeated every day under the slow, descending sun. The golden light of the afternoon deepened, turning the color of amber and fire. It was a slow, theatrical light, one that painted the world in tones of farewell. It set the western-facing walls of the temples and basilicas ablaze with a final, magnificent glow, while the eastern sides of the streets fell into cool, deep blue shadow. The long shadows born in the afternoon had now become lazy giants. They stretched across the entire public square, dark and silent rivers flowing over the warm stone, swallowing the last patches of light. The square itself was a ghost of its midday self. It was a vast and lonely expanse of warm light and cool darkness. The great voice of 10,000 conversations had faded to a whisper, and then to nothing. All that remained was the solitary, constant music of the central fountain. Its splashing water echoed in the immense quiet, a sound that seemed to measure the passing moments of the fading day. The last of the vendors had packed his wares and departed. His cart rumbled softly into a side street until its sound was swallowed by the city's growing stillness. A lone custodian, a figure made small by the scale of the architecture, swept the stone flags with a wide broom. The rhythmic shush of his broom was a soft, meditative sound in the quiet. The air, once thick with dust and spice, was now thin and clean. The dust had settled, and the cooling atmosphere carried only the fundamental sense of the city. The clean, damp smell of the fountain spray, the ancient, stony perfume of the marble buildings, the faint, pleasant scent of sun-baked earth. The great heart had found its resting pace. The city was settling, breathing deeply in the long, quiet moments before the fall of evening. The day's fever had broken, leaving behind a profound and gentle calm. The night was a whisper of dark ink, fading into the memory of the stars. A new day waited just beyond the horizon, a promise painted in soft violet and pale rose. The 7 hills of the great city were still silhouettes, sleeping giants crowned with the ghosts of temples. Down below, the world was holding its breath, The streets were rivers of cool grey stone, empty of their daily torrent of sandals and voices. The great public square, the heart of the world, was a hollow drum. It waited for the first footstep to sound its rhythm. Silence was the emperor of this moment, a deep and velvet quiet. You could feel it settle on the rooftops, draping itself over the arches and the colonnades. The air was cool against the skin. It carried the scent of damp earth from the city's many gardens. A faint perfume of night-blooming jasmine lingered, a sweet memory of the darkness. From a baker's oven somewhere in the labyrinth of alleys came a warmer scent. It was the smell of yeast and heat, the first stirrings of the city's hunger. It was a distant smell, a single note in a vast and silent symphony. The statues of forgotten heroes stood watch. Their marble eyes saw nothing, yet seemed to hold the stories of 1,000 years. Dew collected on their stone brows like cold tears, tracing paths down weathered cheeks. The great buildings were silent witnesses. Their columns reached for a sky that was slowly, gently waking up. Every door was closed. Every window was a dark eye shuttered against the dreams of its occupants. The city was a vast and intricate machine at rest. Its gears were still. Its great engine was quiet. Soon the sun would arrive. It would pour liquid gold onto the cobblestones. It would call the people from their sleep. The vendors would shout, the carts would rumble, the endless conversation of 1,000,000 souls would begin again. But for now, there was only this perfect, hollow stillness. It was a space between breaths, a pause in the grand and ceaseless story of the empire, a moment of pure and silent emptiness, full of everything that was about to be. Inside the walls of a grand Roman house, the silence was even deeper. It was a held breath, a quiet sealed from the already quiet streets. Here, in the central hall, a square of brightening sky was reflected in a basin of still water. The water was a perfect mirror. It showed you the coming day, a painting of pale light trapped in stone. The air was cool and smelled of beeswax from polished floors, and the faint, clean scent of rainwater collected in the cistern. Around the basin, the house slept. Behind closed doors of dark wood, masters and servants alike drifted on the slow tides of their dreams. The painted figures on the walls seemed to sleep as well. Their vibrant hunts and mythic battles were paused in the grey light, their painted eyes soft and unfocused. The small statues of the household gods stood in their alcove. They were silent guardians in the gloom, their carved faces patient and eternal. Nothing moved, not a drape, not a leaf on the potted laurel tree. The house was a world unto itself, a miniature kingdom of slumber. Then a sound. It was not from within, it came from the world outside. A single shutter somewhere in the winding lanes scraped open. The noise was small, a slight scratch against the immense silence, but it was enough. It was the first note. Another followed soon after. From the direction of the river, a mule brayed, a long and lonely complaint against the coming toil. The sound travelled over the rooftops, a ripple spreading through the stillness, and then a more human sound, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal. A blacksmith, an early riser, had begun his day. His hammer was a steady, resonant heartbeat. It was a promise of warmth and work. That single, repeating sound did not shatter the peace. Instead, it gave the silence a shape. It was the anchor around which the morning would now turn. The quiet was no longer empty. It was expectant. It was listening to the first stirrings of its own end. That distant hammer was a persistent guest. It knocked gently upon the walls of the great house, a sound that seeped through stone and wood. It found its way into the smallest, darkest rooms where the servants slept. On a simple mat of woven reeds, A young woman opened her eyes. The sound was the clock of her world. It was the signal that the quiet time was over. She sat up, the rough wool of her blanket a familiar weight against her skin. For a moment, she was just a shape in the gloom, listening. The hammer fell again and again, a steady and patient rhythm. It was time. The air in the small room was thick and still, carrying the scent of sleeping bodies and old straw. She rose, her bare feet finding the cold, smooth stone of the floor. Her movements were practiced, a quiet economy of motion learned over years of early rising. Her hands found what they sought in the dark. A small clay lamp, a flask of oil, a piece of flint. A spark flew, a brief star in the darkness. Then a small flame sputtered to life, a tiny sun in her cupped hands. The light cast her shadow long against the wall, a giant that trembled and swayed. She lit another lamp from her own, passing the flame to another who had just awoken. The light spread through the servants' quarters, a silent, shared message. One flame became 2, then 4. The darkness did not vanish, but it softened, retreating into the corners. Soft coughs and the whisper of shuffling feet began to replace the absolute stillness. The house was breathing in. Its lungs were the corridors and kitchens, and these first servants were the air that filled them. They moved out into the main arteries of the sleeping home, their small lamps bobbing like fireflies. They were the silent vanguard of the new day, on their way to wake the fires and warm the water, preparing the world for those who were still dreaming. The small flames drifted like captured stars through the vast, dark spaces of the house. They floated down long corridors, past closed doors that guarded the dreams of the wealthy. The light pushed back the gloom, but it also made the shadows deeper. The frescoes on the walls seemed to stir as the light passed. Painted horses appeared to lift their legs. Mythical creatures seemed to breathe in the flickering orange glow. The servants moved like ghosts on a secret errand. Their bare feet made no sound on the intricate mosaics of the floor. They were the blood returning to the veins of the sleeping giant. They reached the kitchen. It was a cavern of cold stone and deep shadows. The air was heavy with the ghosts of yesterday's meals, the faint smell of garlic and old wine. One woman knelt at the great stone hearth. It was a dark and empty mouth. She carefully laid tinder and small sticks within it. With a practiced breath, she offered her lamp's flame to the dry fibers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a tiny curl of white smoke rose, a fragile soul ascending. A small orange spark awoke, then another. A soft crackle broke the silence, the sound of waking wood. The fire took a breath and then grew, a hungry, living thing. It painted the kitchen in warm, dancing colors. It chased the cold from the stones. Another servant poured water from a heavy clay jug into a bronze pot. The sound was a low, liquid whisper. Soon, this water would steam and bubble, heated by the new fire. The scent of wood smoke began to fill the air, a clean and honest smell. It mingled with the scent of grain being scooped from a sack, ready for grinding. Each task was a small, quiet piece of a larger ceremony. It was the ancient ritual of making a house into a home. While the master and his family slept on, wrapped in fine linen and pleasant dreams, their world was being rebuilt around them. It was being warmed and fed, prepared, and set in order by these silent, dutiful hands, all moving to the steady, distant beat of the blacksmith's hammer. The sounds of the waking house travelled upwards. They crept along the mosaic floors and climbed the wooden stairs. They were soft sounds, the clink of pottery and the murmur of water. They arrived at the master's bedroom door, not as a noise, but as a subtle change in the quality of the silence. Here, in this room, the world was softer. The light that dared to enter was tamed, filtered through a heavy curtain of deep crimson wool. It painted the air with a dim, rosy glow. The distant blacksmith's hammer was only a memory here, a faint pulse, felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. On a large bed carved from dark, fragrant wood, the master of the house stirred. He was adrift in the last moments of a dream, a pleasant fog of forgotten images. His awakening was not a sharp command like the servants'. It was a slow tide, a gentle return to the shores of the conscious world. He opened his eyes. He saw the familiar crimson light and the intricate patterns of the ceiling above him. He felt the impossible softness of the linen sheets against his skin, a fabric as fine as a summer cloud. The air in the room was still and warm. It held the faint, expensive scent of the scented oil his wife had used the night before. He lay motionless for a time, simply listening. He was the heart of this small kingdom. The sounds he heard were proof that his world was functioning as it should. The soft thud of a log being placed on a fire, the scrape of a wooden stool on the kitchen floor below, the almost imperceptible whisper of a servant's feet in the corridor outside his door. Each sound was a reassurance. Each was a sign that his day was being prepared for him. The house was a flower, and it was opening its petals in anticipation of his rising. He took a slow breath, inhaling the warm, comfortable air of his own life. Then, with a quiet sigh, he pushed the fine blankets aside and sat up. The day could now truly begin. The chill of the stone floor seeped through the thick wool rug under his bare feet. It was a pleasant shock, a reminder of the solid world he was rejoining. A soft knock, a sound as gentle as falling dust, came at the door. He gave a quiet murmur of assent. The door opened without a sound, and his personal servant entered, an old man whose face was a map of loyal years. The servant carried a bronze basin that steamed in the cool, rosy air of the room. He moved with a silent grace, a lifetime of service distilled into perfect, noiseless efficiency. He placed the basin on a wooden stand and unfurled a length of soft, white linen. The master sat in a carved chair. The servant draped a cloth around his shoulders. The scent of hot water and crushed herbs rose to meet him, a clean and invigorating perfume. He felt the warmth of a damp cloth on his face, softening his skin, preparing him for the razor. The world outside was growing louder now. A heavy cart rumbled past, its wheels grinding against the paving stones. The sound was a low growl that vibrated through the house. Then came the first clear voice from the street, a vendor calling out the day's first offerings of olives and cheese. His voice was a song of commerce, a melody the master knew well. The servant's hand was steady. The cool, sharp edge of the bronze razor slid against his skin. It was a familiar and trusted sensation. The quiet scrape was the only sound in the room, a small, personal noise against the growing symphony of the city. When it was done, another warm cloth wiped his face clean. His skin felt new, smooth and awake. The servant helped him to his feet and held out a tunic of fine, earth-colored wool. The fabric was soft and heavy. As it settled over his shoulders, it was like putting on a familiar responsibility. His sandals were placed at his feet. He slipped them on, the leather cool against his skin. The ritual was complete. He was no longer a man soft from sleep. He was dressed. He was the father of the family. He was a citizen. He stood for a moment, listening to the city calling to him, a vast and complex creature that was now fully awake. He opened the heavy wooden door. The sound of its movement was solid and deep. The corridor beyond was brighter than his room, filled with the indirect light of the new morning. He stepped out, his sandals making a soft, rhythmic slap on the mosaic floor. The world he entered was his own creation, a place of order and purpose. The painted figures on the walls were no longer sleeping ghosts. They were alive with color in the growing light. He saw gods and goddesses, heroes in their chariots, scenes of bountiful harvests. They were the stories that made his world. As he walked toward the central hall, The air changed. The warm, close scent of the bedroom gave way to a fresher, more complex perfume. He could smell the damp earth of the potted ferns and the faint, sweet scent of oil burning in a single lamp before the household shrine. But strongest of all was the smell coming from the kitchens. It was the scent of life itself. It was warm bread, a smell as honest as stone. It was the sharp, clean scent of ripening fruit. It promised the simple sustenance that would begin the day. He reached the opening to the great hall. Light poured down from the square opening in the roof, a solid column of gold that illuminated the entire space. The basin of water below was no longer a dark mirror. It was a piece of the sky, a brilliant, shimmering blue. Standing by the basin was his wife. She was arranging a spray of white flowers in a clay vase, her movements graceful and calm. His eldest son stood near the entrance to the garden, a wax tablet and stylus in his hands, already contemplating his studies. They were islands of quiet activity in the bright, open space. They did not speak. A simple nod of acknowledgement was enough. It was a silent conversation, a daily reaffirmation of their shared existence. A small table had been set near the garden. Upon it was a loaf of bread, a bowl of olives, a wedge of pale cheese, and a pitcher of water, cooled with morning dew. He moved toward it, the center of his own small universe, ready to break his fast as the city and the empire roared to life just beyond his walls. He took his seat at the small table. The wood was smooth and cool to the touch. He reached for the bread, his hands knowing its familiar shape and warmth. He broke the loaf, the sound a soft, satisfying tear. The scent of yeast and baked grain rose to meet him, a comforting perfume. He dipped a piece of the bread into a shallow dish of green gold oil. He ate slowly, deliberately. The flavors were simple and ancient. The bread was hearty. The oil was fruity and rich. He picked an olive from a small bowl. It was sharp and salty, a taste of the sun-drenched hills. He drank cool water from a simple clay cup. The meal was not a grand affair. It was a quiet anchor in the morning, a moment of stillness before the day's tide pulled him out to sea. The sounds of the city were now a constant, steady roar, like a distant waterfall. But here in the garden courtyard, the noise was softened. It was a backdrop to the closer, gentler sounds, the quiet scratch of his son's stylus on wax, the whisper of his wife's robe as she tended to her flowers, a single bird singing a short, bright song from the roof. The sun was higher now. Its light slanted across the garden, turning the dew on the fig leaves into 1,000 tiny diamonds. The warmth was pleasant on his face. This quiet breakfast was the last ritual of the private morning. It was a border between the man of the family and the man of the world. Soon, the great front door of the house would be unbarred. The first of his clients would be waiting in the street, men with petitions and problems, men seeking advantage and advice. They would flow into the central hall, and his home would transform into a place of business. His duties would claim him. He finished the last of his meal. He had fortified himself with the peace of his own home. He was ready for the noise, for the politics, for the endless, intricate dance of the city. With a final glance at the serene garden, he rose from the table. The day's work had arrived. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the servant. The signal was understood. The old man moved to the great front door, a heavy thing of wood and bronze. 2 younger servants joined him. Together they lifted the immense wooden bar from its brackets. The sound of it settling on the stone floor was a deep thud, a signal that the sanctuary was now open. The bronze hinges groaned like a waking beast as the twin doors swung inward. And then the day truly flooded the house. It was a wave of light and sound and smell. The brilliant, unfiltered sunlight of the street poured into the central hall, erasing the soft morning shadows. It illuminated a cloud of dancing dust motes, each one a tiny golden world. With the light came the noise. The low murmur of the waiting crowd swelled into a chorus of greetings, coughs, and shuffling feet. Dozens of sandals scraped and slapped against the mosaics where only his own had sounded moments before. The scents of the city rushed in, a sudden and potent mixture. The smells of street dust, of sweat from anxious bodies, of livestock from a passing cart, of bread from a nearby public oven, all mingled with the clean, contained air of his home. The house exhaled its peaceful perfume of flowers and oil, and inhaled the raw, vibrant breath of the city. The people flowed into the hall, a human river filling the basin of his home. They were a tapestry of wool and linen, of muted earth tones and the occasional bright splash of a wealthy merchant's dye. Their faces were upturned and expectant, a garden of human need. They were farmers with disputes, soldiers seeking promotion, merchants hoping for contracts. They were his world, his responsibility. He stood taller now, the quiet father of the family dissolving into the public patron. His expression settled into one of calm, attentive authority. The private morning was a dream now past. The real day, the day of the great empire, had begun. The central hall was no longer a home. It was a court, and he was its center. He took a single step forward, and the human river parted before him. The general murmur of the crowd separated into distinct threads of sound. A man stepped from the throng, his hands gnarled like old olive roots. His face was weathered by sun and worry. He smelled of turned earth and the clean sweat of honest labor. He spoke of a boundary stone moved, a dispute with a neighbor that threatened his family's small patch of land. The master listened. He did not look at the man's worn tunic, but into his anxious eyes. His own voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured. It was a different voice from the one he used with his wife and son. This one was a tool, an instrument of assurance. He gave the farmer a promise. A word would be sent to the local magistrate. The man bowed, his face transformed by a fragile glimmer of hope. He then melted back into the crowd. Another took his place. This was a merchant, smelling faintly of salt and cloves. His tunic was a finer weave. He spoke not of land, but of shipping contracts and tariffs at a distant port. His problem was written on a scroll of papyrus, which he held out with a soft hand. The master took the scroll, his fingers brushing against the merchant's. He scanned the neat lines of text. His mind, which had been at peace in the garden, was now a great ledger. It recorded debts, favors, and connections. He gave the merchant a different kind of promise, a meeting with a man who managed the warehouses by the river. And so it went. Each person was a new story, a new request. A soldier needed a letter of recommendation. A young poet hoped for a moment to recite a verse. A woman pleaded for help for her unjustly imprisoned brother. The central hall was a theatre of supplication. The air was thick with the scent of humanity, 100 different lives brought together in this single, sunlit space. He was the calm center of this spinning wheel of need, dispensing influence, advice, and hope. This was the true work of his day. It was the careful tending of a garden of obligation, a garden that gave his family its name, its comfort, and its power. The sun climbed higher, and the column of light in the central hall lost its gentle, golden quality. It became a brighter, hotter white. The human tide that had flooded his home began to ebb. One by one the clients departed. Their hopes were now either small seeds planted by his promises or dust scattered by his refusal. The great hall, once packed with bodies and voices, slowly emptied. It left behind the ghosts of their anxieties and the fine layer of city dust their sandals had carried in. The air itself seemed to relax, to expand back into its original shape. The roar of 100 conversations subsided, leaving only the echo of its passage. The last petitioner, a woman clutching a worn shawl, finally finished her quiet, desperate plea. He gave her a coin, a small gesture of pity more than a promise. She bowed her head, a silent thank you, and turned to leave. She was the final drop of the morning's river, disappearing back into the vast ocean of the city. The great doors swung shut behind her. The sound of the heavy wooden bar being dropped back into its place was a note of finality. It was a deep, resonant sigh. The house was a private sanctuary once more. Immediately, the servants reappeared. They moved with quiet purpose, like bees restoring their hive. One began to sweep the floor, her broom a soft whisper against the mosaics, gathering the dust of the outside world. Another wiped down a small table where a careless hand had left a ring of moisture. The master stood for a moment in the restored quiet. The morning's work was done. He had listened and judged, promised and denied. He was a human bridge between the powerless and the powerful. He felt the familiar, gentle fatigue that followed this daily ceremony. But there was no time for rest. He turned to his scribe, who had been standing silently in the corner, his wax tablet filled with notes. He gave a few short, crisp instructions for letters that needed to be written. Then he straightened his tunic. The business of the house was finished. The business of the city awaited. He walked toward the great doors, no longer a patron receiving guests, but a man about to step onto the world's largest stage. The great doors opened for the second time that morning. They did not groan this time. They swung outward with a sense of purpose. He stepped across the stone threshold from the quiet shade of his house into the full, bright glare of the day. It was like stepping into a different season. The sun was no longer a gentle visitor. It was a hot, heavy blanket laid across the city. The street was a river of noise and motion, a churning current of humanity. The air, which had been tamed and perfumed within his walls, was now a wild, untamed thing. It was a tapestry woven from 1,000 different threads of scent. The smell of hot bread from the public bakery at the corner mingled with the sharp, acrid smell of animal dung. The sweet scent of overripe figs from a vendor's cart blended with the metallic tang of the blacksmith's forge. Voices were everywhere. They were not the polite murmurs of his clients, but the full-throated shouts of life being lived out loud. A man selling cheap wine called out his prices. Two women leaned from opposite windows, their conversation a thread stretched high above the street. The laughter of children, sudden and bright, cut through the deeper rumbling of iron-rimmed wagon wheels. He paused for a moment, letting the sensory flood wash over him. Then he began to walk. Two attendants, who had been waiting by the door, fell into step behind him. They were a small island of quiet purpose in the chaotic stream. He moved with the crowd, but was not entirely of it. He was a stone in the river, feeling the current pull and swirl around him, yet maintaining his own steady course. The cobblestones were warm beneath his leather sandals. The heat rose from them in visible waves. He was on his way to the great public square, the center of all things. He had left his small, personal kingdom behind to walk through the larger, shared kingdom of the city itself. He navigated the winding veins of the city. The streets were canyons carved by time and countless footsteps. Above him, tall apartment buildings leaned toward each other, as if sharing secrets just above the heads of the crowd. They blotted out the sun in places, creating sudden pools of cool blue shade. From their high windows, lines of laundry fluttered like the prayer flags of 100 different families. Reds and yellows and faded whites, they were the quiet banners of ordinary life. He passed shop fronts that were little more than dark caves in the stone. From one came the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a cobbler's hammer. From another, the rich, earthy scent of leather goods. A cookshop vented a cloud of steam that smelled of sizzling meat and garlic, a momentary delicious fog in the street. He saw faces from every corner of the known world. A soldier from the northern frontier, his skin pale and his eyes a startling blue. A merchant from a sun-scorched southern land, his skin dark as polished wood, bartering loudly for a bolt of silk. Servants with focused eyes carried heavy jars on their shoulders. Children darted through the forest of adult legs, their laughter like sparks from a fire. The path narrowed. He felt the press of the crowd, a warm, living wall of bodies. It was a swift current of people. He heard the splash and gurgle of a public fountain ahead. For a moment, its cool song was louder than the surrounding din. People gathered there, cupping their hands to drink, splashing water on their hot faces. The stone around it was dark and slick with moisture. He saw the glint of a discarded coin at the bottom of the basin, a small offering to the spirit of the water. He kept walking, moving past these small, momentary scenes. Each one was a tiny play, a story that began and ended in the space of a single glance. He was walking through a living library, each person a book he would never have time to read. The great square was getting closer now. The sound of the crowd was changing, becoming a deeper, more constant roar, the sound of the city's very heart. Then the canyon of the street began to widen. The tall buildings fell away like curtains being drawn back to reveal a great stage. The sky, once a narrow ribbon of blue, opened up into a vast, brilliant expanse. The sunlight was no longer a rare visitor. It was an ocean of light, and he was walking onto its shore. The architecture changed. The rough stone and tired brick of the apartment blocks gave way to something grander, whiter, and more severe. Great buildings of pale marble stood with solemn faces under the hot sun. Their columns were like the bones of giants. They were temples and law courts and government houses. They were the engines of the empire, and their stone walls hummed with a silent, invisible power. The sound of the city changed too. The sharp, individual noises of the alleyways melted together. They became a single, immense roar, the sound of a great beast breathing. It was the sound of 100,000 conversations, 1,000 arguments, 100 deals being struck. It was the sound of power itself. The crowd shifted. The frantic energy of the narrow streets was replaced by a more deliberate, measured pace. There were more men in fine white robes, their cloth catching the sunlight. They walked in small groups, their heads bent together in serious discussion. Their faces were masks of ambition and concentration. He smelled hot stone and the dust of ages. The air tasted of power. He passed the wide, shallow steps of a temple dedicated to a god of commerce. Men sat on the steps, their faces impassive, waiting for an opportunity or a verdict. They looked like statues themselves. He was now standing at the edge of it all, at the mouth of the river. Before him lay the great public square, the heart of the world. It was a vast paved desert of light and noise waiting to be crossed. He stepped from the relative shade of the colonnade onto the open floor of the great square. The heat struck him at once, a physical presence rising from the pale, sun-bleached stones. The space was immense, a man-made valley of marble and light. It was designed to make a man feel small, to remind him of the scale of the empire he served. The roar of the crowd was a constant, living thing. It was the sound of thousands of lives intersecting in this one vast space. It was the hum of commerce, the murmur of politics, the steady beat of the heart of the world. He began to walk, his sandals whispering on the hot stone. His destination was a great hall of justice on the far side of the square. The journey was a voyage across a human sea. He navigated through clusters of men in deep conversation, their hands moving as they shaped arguments and ideas in the air. He passed a money changer's table, the clink and rattle of coins a sharp, metallic music. A group of soldiers, their armor glinting like beetle shells, marched past with disciplined purpose, their boot steps a steady rhythm in the chaos. Above it all, the statues watched. Bronze emperors on bronze horses rode forever toward a silent victory. Marble gods and goddesses looked down with serene, unblinking eyes. They were the permanent audience for this endless daily play. The air smelled of dust, hot marble, and the faint, sweet scent of incense drifting from a nearby temple. He could feel the sun on the back of his neck, a warm and heavy hand. This was the center of everything. Decisions made here would ripple outward for 1,000 miles to the misty northern forests and the scorching southern deserts. He was a part of it, a single thread in its impossibly complex tapestry, and he felt the weight and wonder of it with every step he took. He saw a face he knew across the shimmering heat. It was another man of influence, a rival whose ambitions ran in a current opposite to his own. Their eyes met for a single, calculated moment across the sea of heads. There was no greeting. There was only a slight, formal nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of a long and complicated game. Then they were strangers again, two separate ships passing on a vast and crowded ocean. A little farther on, a man with a loud, strained voice stood upon a small wooden platform. He was an orator, a speaker for hire, his arms cutting through the thick air as he tried to sell an idea to the uninterested crowd. A few people lingered to listen. Most simply flowed around his small island of passion, their faces indifferent. The speaker's words were lost in the greater noise, his voice just one more thread in the immense, roaring tapestry. The man of the house passed him by. He had heard 1,000 such speeches. They were the background music of the square. His focus was on the building that now loomed before him. It was a great hall of justice, a mountain of marble and order. Its face was a forest of towering columns, each one thick and white and perfect. In its shadow, the heat of the square seemed to lessen. The chaos of the crowd felt more distant. The building was a promise of quiet logic in a world of loud emotion. It radiated a cool, silent authority. This was a place where words had weight, where arguments were measured, and where the sprawling, messy life of the empire was filtered through the fine mesh of the law. He reached the bottom of the wide marble steps. They ascended into the building's dark, welcoming mouth. He paused, brushing the dust from his tunic, composing his thoughts. He was leaving the open, sun-baked world of the square behind. He was about to enter the shaded, serious world of the court. He began to climb the wide marble steps. Each one he ascended was a step away from the city's fever. The roar of the square faded behind him, not suddenly but gently, as if he were walking away from a distant sea. With each step, the sun's grip loosened. He passed from its direct heat into the cool, deep shadow of the portico. He stood before the entrance, a dark, towering rectangle that seemed to exhale a breath of cold air. He crossed the threshold. It was like stepping into a deep cave or into the quiet of a forest. The sound of the city was gone. It had been swallowed whole by the immense stone building. All that remained was a faint, almost imperceptible hum, the ghost of the noise he had just left behind. The light inside was thin and pale. High above, narrow windows let in a filtered, dusty sunlight. It fell in long, silent shafts, illuminating clouds of slowly dancing dust motes. The air was still and heavy. It tasted of cool stone and old papyrus and the faint, dry scent of time itself. The space was enormous. Great columns of polished granite rose up into the gloom, their tops lost in the shadows of the high ceiling. The ceiling itself was a vast and intricate web of dark timbers, a man-made sky. The people here moved differently. Their footsteps echoed in the vast silence. Men in robes huddled in quiet, intense groups, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. Scribes hurried from one chamber to another, their arms laden with scrolls and wax tablets. They were priests and acolytes in the temple of the law. He paused for a moment, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He felt the weight of the building around him, the immense pressure of accumulated history and unwavering authority. Across the vast, echoing floor, he saw a group of men gathered near a smaller, curtained doorway. That was his destination. That was where his case would be heard. He took a slow breath of the cool, formal air and began his walk across the great stone floor. His sandals made a solitary sound on the polished stone floor. Each step was a small, clear note that bloomed in the immense silence and then faded. The echo traveled far, a ghost of his own progress, touching the distant walls and returning as a faint whisper. He walked through the forest of great columns. They were cold, silent giants, their polished surfaces reflecting the dim light like dark water. To touch one would be like touching the heart of a mountain. He passed through the long shafts of sunlight that pierced the gloom. For a moment, his tunic would be bright, and he would see the intricate weave of the fabric. Then he would step back into the cool shadows, the world turning to shades of grey once more. He saw the other inhabitants of this stone world. They were not a crowd. They were small islands of humanity in a vast, silent sea. Lawyers in their robes stood in tight circles, their heads bowed together, their whispers too low to be understood. At small wooden tables set against the far walls, scribes worked with unending patience. The only sound from them was the faint, dry scratch of a stylus on wax, a sound like an insect's legs on a dry leaf. This was a place where passions were distilled into neat lines of text, where a man's life could be held on a single sheet of papyrus. As he drew nearer to the curtained doorway, the figures of the men waiting there became clearer. He saw the familiar face of his legal opponent, a man with eyes as sharp and cold as chips of flint. He saw the witnesses, their faces a mixture of nervousness and boredom. He reached the group. The low murmur of their conversation died as he arrived. Heads turned. Eyes assessed him. The silence that fell around them was different from the silence of the great hall. This was a focused silence, a quiet full of unspoken arguments and coiled tension. The air was charged, waiting for the curtain to be drawn back, for the real business to begin. He stood among them, a silent island in a quiet sea. No words were exchanged. The game had moved beyond pleasantries. The only language now was the slight shifting of weight, the subtle turn of a head, the quick, unreadable glance. He looked at the curtain before them. It was a heavy thing of deep, dark wool, the color of dried blood. It hung from a bronze rod high above, its folds so deep and still they seemed carved from stone. The curtain absorbed all sound, all light. It was a door to another world, a place of judgment. It guarded its secrets well. His opponent stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a statue of himself, a man of controlled and patient menace. Beside him, a witness cleared his throat softly, the sound unnaturally loud in the focused quiet. The witness stared at the floor, at his own sandals, at anything but the faces of the men he stood between. Another witness nervously twisted a small ring on his finger, the motion a tiny, repetitive prayer. Time itself seemed to slow down in this pocket of the great hall. The dusty shafts of light from the high windows crept across the floor with imperceptible slowness. They were the only clocks in this still, waiting world. He could feel the cold of the marble floor seeping up through the leather of his sandals. It was a patient, ancient cold. He breathed in the dry air, the scent of stone and time. Then from behind the heavy curtain, came a sound. It was the scraping of a chair on a stone floor. A low, indistinct voice followed, a single word of command. The waiting was over. The heavy wool began to stir. The heavy wool began to stir, not with a sudden movement, but with a slow, reluctant sigh. The bronze rings holding the curtain aloft made a dry, scraping sound on the rod, the sound of old bones shifting. The fabric whispered against itself, a soft and solemn sound. An opening appeared, a dark slice in the world of waiting. Through it came a different quality of air, stiller and older. A clerk, a man whose face was as blank as an unwritten tablet, held the edge of the curtain. He did not speak. He simply gestured them forward into the mouth of the chamber. He stepped across the threshold, from the vast public silence into a smaller, more private quiet. The room was an austere box, panelled in dark, polished wood. It seemed to drink the light. There were no bright frescoes here, no cheerful mosaics on the floor. This was a place for words alone, a machine for finding truth. The air was close and smelled of the dry perfume of old papyrus, the sharp scent of ink, and the beeswax used to polish the simple wooden furniture. It was the scent of focused thought. At the far end of the room, on a platform raised by a single, deep step, sat the magistrate. He was not a man so much as a function, a figure carved from law. His white robe was a stark contrast to the dark wood of his high-backed chair. His hands rested on the table before him, perfectly still. His eyes were not focused on them as they entered, but on some middle distance, as if weighing concepts rather than looking at people. One by one they filed in. Their footsteps, which had echoed in the great hall, were now soft, muted thuds on the wooden floorboards. The opponent, his face a mask of confidence. The witnesses, their eyes darting nervously around the simple room. Each man moved to his designated place without being told, guided by an invisible geometry of legal tradition. The clerk let the curtain fall. It closed with a soft, final whoosh, a sound that sealed the world away. The dim light from the main hall vanished. Now the only light came from a single high window, letting in a beam of clear, unforgiving daylight. They were enclosed now, captured in this box of judgment. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy blanket, pressing down, demanding substance. The magistrate slowly lowered his gaze, and his eyes, for the first time, met theirs. The hearing had begun. The magistrate's voice finally broke the silence. It was not a voice for speaking. It was the sound of a key turning in a rusty lock, a dry and mechanical thing. It did not fill the room. It simply made a small, sharp space in the quiet. He called upon the plaintiff to begin. A man in a dark tunic, the opponent's lawyer, took a single step forward. He inclined his head, a small gesture of respect to the magistrate's chair. Then he began to speak. His voice was the opposite of the magistrate's. It was a fluid and polished thing, a river of smooth stones. It flowed into every corner of the small chamber, washing against the dark wood walls. He did not shout. He did not plead. He simply built. Each word was a brick, perfectly formed and free of emotion. Each sentence was a layer of mortar, binding the bricks together. He spoke of a business deal, of shipments of grain from a faraway province. He mentioned dates and weights and sums of money. The words themselves were hard and clear, like chips of ice. They were not meant to persuade through passion, but to build a prison of logic. The man of the house stood motionless, a statue of listening. His eyes were fixed on the lawyer, watching the careful construction of the argument. He felt each word as a physical thing, landing in the quiet air. The lawyer's hands made small, precise motions, as if he were shaping the very air into proof. In the single shaft of high sunlight, the dust motes danced and swirled, disturbed by the sound waves of the lawyer's voice. The magistrate's scribe worked silently, his stylus a tiny, scratching insect, capturing the argument, pinning the words like butterflies onto his wax tablet. The lawyer continued, his voice a steady, unvarying drone. He was building a wall around the man of the house, a wall of facts and figures. At last, he fell silent. His final word vanished, and the quiet that returned was different. It was no longer an empty silence. It was a silence filled with the weight of the structure the lawyer had just built. The magistrate did not speak. He simply gestured with a single, slow finger. The lawyer who had just spoken called a name into the quiet room. The name echoed once, softly, and then faded. From the small group of men standing near the curtain, one detached himself. He was a merchant, a man with soft hands and nervous eyes. His tunic was of a fine blue wool, a splash of nervous color in the somber room. He walked to the center of the floor, his sandals making a soft, hesitant sound on the wood. He came to a stop directly in the shaft of light from the high window. The light was a harsh inspector. It found the sheen of sweat on his upper lip and the slight, persistent tremble in his right hand. He looked like a man who was not used to being the center of attention, only the one who paid for it. The plaintiff's lawyer gave him a small, encouraging nod. This witness was a stone for the wall of accusation. His testimony was meant to fit perfectly into the space prepared for it. The clerk administered an oath. The words were ancient and solemn. The merchant repeated them, his voice thin and reedy. He seemed to swallow the last word. He stood blinking in the light, a single, isolated figure. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken questions. He moistened his lips, his gaze fixed on the impassive face of the magistrate. He was a small boat about to be launched onto a very large, very still body of water. The lawyer asked his first question, the voice smooth and calm. The room held its breath, waiting for the first ripple. The merchant's voice, when it finally came, was a thin and brittle thing. It was like the sound of dry leaves skittering across stone. He spoke, and his words were not his own. They were carefully rehearsed, smoothed and shaped to fit the empty spaces in the lawyer's story. He told of a dinner held months ago. The man of the house listened, and he remembered that dinner. He remembered the taste of the spiced wine, the warmth of the lamplight, the easy laughter. But the merchant's words painted a different picture. They drained the color from the memory. In the merchant's telling, the warm lamplight became the dim glow of conspiracy. The easy laughter became the coded language of a secret agreement. A friendly gesture of pouring more wine was now an act of persuasion. Each word the merchant spoke was a careful distortion. It was the truth, but seen through a dark and twisted glass. The man of the house felt the shift. He felt the foundation of his own memory begin to tremble. The lawyer guided the witness with soft, patient questions. He was a gentle gardener tending to a poisonous bloom. The magistrate's face remained a mask of stone. His eyes did not blink. He was a vessel, and he was being filled with this tainted version of the past. The scribe's stylus never stopped its quiet scratching. It was turning these ghosts of words into a solid, permanent record. It was giving weight and form to a lie. The witness finished speaking. His voice trailed off into the thick silence. He had laid his stone. He had placed it carefully in the wall that was being built around the man of the house. He shifted his weight, his part in the play now over, and waited, blinking in the lonely shaft of light. The quiet rushed back into the room. It was heavier this time, filled with the shape of the merchant's words. The man of the house felt them settle, a cold weight in his chest. He did not move. He kept his hands perfectly still in his lap. He breathed in the dry, dead air of the chamber and forced his own anger down, packing it away into a small, hard stone deep inside him. He was a spectator at the dismantling of his own life. Beside him, his own lawyer shifted. The movement was small, just the rustle of wool, but in the profound silence it sounded like a sail catching a new wind. The man of the house did not look at him, but he felt the change. A current of energy had entered his side of the room. The lawyer rose to his feet. He did not rise quickly. He rose like a great slow wave, a deliberate and powerful motion. He was an older man, his face a landscape of patient intelligence. He was not a builder of walls. He was a man who knew how to find the cracks. He took one step forward, leaving the shadows and entering the edge of the sunlight. He did not address the magistrate. He did not look at his opponent. His eyes were fixed only on the nervous merchant, who was still blinking in the bright column of light. The lawyer's gaze was not unkind. It was curious, like a physician studying a strange new fever. The merchant shifted under the gentle weight of that gaze. His brief moment of confidence seemed to evaporate, leaving only the raw nerve of his anxiety. The lawyer let the silence stretch. He let it become uncomfortable. He let it work on the witness like a slow heat. Then he spoke. His voice was nothing like the smooth river of his opponent. It was quiet. It was conversational. It was a single, sharp pebble dropped into a very still pond. He asked a simple question, a question about the weather on the night of the dinner party. The question about the weather hung in the air. It was a small, simple thing, a piece of dust in a complicated machine. The merchant blinked, his mind a flurry of practiced lies about contracts and promises. The weather had not been part of his rehearsal. He hesitated. His eyes flickered toward the plaintiff's lawyer, a tiny, desperate signal. The lawyer's face was a stone. No help would come from there. The merchant stammered. He said it was a mild evening, he thought. Yes, mild and clear. His voice lacked the confidence it had held just moments before. The old lawyer nodded, as if the merchant had just revealed a profound secret. He then asked another question, his voice just as quiet, just as calm. He asked about the food. Did the merchant recall the roast peacock, or was it goose that night? The man of the house felt a small, cold knot of satisfaction inside him. There had been no bird served that night. It had been a simple meal of fish and bread. The merchant, trapped in the harsh spotlight, began to invent. He spoke of a peacock, its flavors, its presentation. He was building a new room onto his house of lies, but the foundation was sand. The old lawyer listened with patient curiosity. He let the merchant finish. Then he asked about the music. Was it a lyre or a flute that had played in the garden? The questions were gentle, almost kind. They were not accusations. They were invitations to remember. But the merchant was not remembering. He was constructing, and his construction was clumsy, full of mismatched stones and crooked walls. His answers grew shorter. His certainty evaporated. The solid ground of his testimony had turned to mud, and he was sinking. The old lawyer was not attacking the fortress of the lie. He was simply walking around it, tapping gently on the walls and letting the hollow spaces reveal themselves. He finished with a final, simple question about the color of the host's tunic. The merchant could not answer. He just stood there, a man undone by the memory of a dinner he had reshaped into a weapon, only to forget its true and simple details. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the shape of the fallen lie. The merchant stood in the column of light, but the light no longer illuminated him. It exposed him. He seemed smaller now, a ruin of a man. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed. The house of his testimony had fallen down around him, and he was standing in the rubble. The old lawyer did not press his advantage. He gave a small, almost invisible nod to the magistrate. It was not a gesture of triumph. It was a simple statement that his work was done. He then took a single step back, melting into the shadows beside his client. For the first time, a change came over the magistrate. It was not an expression. It was a subtle shift in the massive stillness of his face, like a stone settling deeper into the earth. He looked at the broken witness for a long, silent moment. Then his dry, mechanical voice cut the quiet. He dismissed the man. The merchant turned, his movements clumsy. He walked away from the bright shaft of light. His footsteps on the wooden floor were no longer hesitant. They were the sound of a retreat, a shuffling, defeated sound. He returned to the small group by the curtain, but he was no longer a part of it. He was an island of failure, and the others instinctively drew away from him. The room breathed a quiet sigh. A single, poorly placed stone had been removed, and now the entire wall of the accusation seemed fragile and uncertain. The plaintiff's lawyer stood for a moment in the thick, altered silence. His face was a mask of professional calm, but a small muscle tightening in his jaw betrayed the sting of his witness's failure. The smooth river of his confidence had hit a rock, and the currents were now turbulent and unseen. He did not look at his defeated merchant. He simply turned his head slightly toward the magistrate, a silent request to continue. The magistrate gave a slow, deliberate blink. It was permission. The lawyer called another name. This time his voice was a little louder, a little sharper, as if to cut through the lingering cloud of doubt. A new figure detached himself from the group by the door. This was not another soft merchant. This was a man made of different material. He was a ship's captain, and he smelled faintly of salt and tar, a scent of distant seas in the dry, dusty room. His face was burned by 100 foreign suns, and his hands were hard and calloused. He moved with a steady, rolling gait, the walk of a man used to a moving deck beneath his feet. His footsteps on the wood were heavy and sure. He came to a stop in the same shaft of light that had undone the merchant. But this man did not blink or flinch. He seemed to absorb the light, to own it. He met the magistrate's gaze with a direct, unwavering stare. The clerk administered the same ancient oath, and the captain's voice, when he repeated the words, was a low rumble, like stones rolling in the tide. He was a piece of the outside world, a piece of the empire's vast and rugged machinery, brought here into this sterile room of words and shadows. He was a new kind of stone for the wall of accusation. This one looked harder, denser, and much more difficult to crack. The plaintiff's lawyer began to speak to the captain. His voice was a smooth tool designed to shape the hard material before him. He asked about a specific voyage, a journey made 3 months prior. The captain answered. His voice was not like the merchant's thin, reedy sound. It was low and rough, like a coarse rope being pulled across stone. The words were simple and direct. They were facts, scraped clean of any emotion. He spoke of winds and tides, of the days spent at sea, of the color of the water in a distant harbor. He held a small, rolled-up scroll of papyrus in his hand. He did not need to look at it. The details were etched into his memory like charts carved into wood. He spoke of the cargo. He gave the exact number of sacks of grain loaded onto his ship. He gave the weight, the designated markings on the sacks. His testimony was not a memory of a pleasant dinner. It was a page from a logbook, read aloud into the quiet room. Each fact was a stone, hard and heavy and real. The man of the house felt the small victory he had tasted just moments ago turn to ash in his mouth. The merchant's lies had been a phantom, a thing of smoke that could be blown away. This was different. The captain's words were solid objects. They were landing in the center of the room, and they were beginning to form a new wall, stronger and more carefully built than the first. The old lawyer beside him was perfectly still, listening. He was watching this new structure being built, searching for a flaw, a crack, a single misplaced stone. But the captain's testimony was seamless. It was a single, solid piece of the hard, physical world, and it fit perfectly into the space the accuser had made for it. The lawyer for the plaintiff finished. He had laid the final stone of his witness's testimony. He gave a slight, confident bow to the magistrate and stepped back into the shadows, leaving the captain standing solid and immovable in the lonely light. The quiet returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the silence of a sealed room, a space where a truth seemed to have been established, hard and unyielding as iron. The old lawyer rose to his feet. His movement was slow, the soft rustle of his robe the only sound. He did not walk toward the captain immediately. He stood for a moment beside his client, a figure of patient thought in the gloom. Then he began to move. His walk was a slow, deliberate journey across the wooden floor. He approached the captain not as an enemy, but as a fellow craftsman might approach the work of another. He stopped a few feet from the captain. He looked at the man's sun-weathered face, at his calloused hands. Then his eyes settled on the small scroll of papyrus the captain held. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost a whisper. It was the voice of a scholar, not a fighter. He asked if he might see the captain's log. The captain, with a shrug of his broad shoulders, handed it over. The old lawyer took the scroll. He did not unroll it immediately. He held it in his hands, feeling its weight, its texture. He looked at the wax seal that held it closed, a small red circle stamped with the sign of a shipping company. He studied the seal for a long time, turning the scroll over in his hands. The room waited. The magistrate watched. The captain stood impassive. Then the old lawyer looked up, his eyes meeting the captain's. He asked a question, not about the cargo, not about the voyage, but about the seal itself. He asked who, exactly, had pressed that small circle of wax into place. The lawyer's quiet question settled in the room. It did not make a loud noise. It was a single drop of dye in a glass of clear water, slowly, inexorably changing the color of everything. The captain, who had stood like a rock, shifted his weight for the first time. The question was not about the sea or the sky or the number of sacks. It was about a small circle of red wax. His brow furrowed. He answered that the company clerk sealed the log, as was the custom. It was a simple answer to a simple question, but the old lawyer did not seem to hear him. He was still looking at the seal, his head slightly tilted. With a slow, deliberate motion, he broke the small red circle. The sound was a tiny, crisp crack, unnaturally loud in the waiting silence. He carefully unrolled the papyrus scroll. The room could hear the dry whisper of the paper as it opened. The lawyer scanned the columns of neat, black ink. He ran a long, thin finger down the page. Then he stopped. He looked up at the captain. His voice was still soft, still conversational. He asked the captain to confirm an entry, a note about a sudden squall that forced a change of course on the third day of the voyage. The captain, his confidence returning to the familiar ground of his journey, agreed. He remembered the storm well. The wind, he said, had come from the north. The old lawyer nodded slowly. Then he held up the scroll, pointing to the entry with his finger, and he asked, very gently, how a storm that happened on the third day at sea could be recorded in a log that was sealed shut in a port office the day before the ship ever sailed. The quiet question transformed. It was no longer a pebble, it was a hammer, and it had just struck the wall of the captain's testimony, creating a single spiderweb crack that threatened to bring the entire structure down. The room became a vacuum. The old lawyer's gentle question had sucked all the air out of it. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was a sharp, ringing thing that pressed in on the ears. The ship's captain, the man of sun-weathered rock, seemed to shrink inside his own skin. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a map of pale dust and fine lines. His mouth opened, a dark O of surprise, but no sound came out. The ship's log, once a symbol of his solid truth, now lay open in the lawyer's hands, a testament to his lie. The captain's eyes, once so steady, darted around the room. They searched for an anchor, for some solid piece of the world to hold on to. But the dark wood walls offered no comfort. The impassive face of the magistrate offered no escape. Across the room, the plaintiff's lawyer made a small, sharp movement, an involuntary clenching of his fist. The foundation of his case, so carefully constructed, had just been turned to sand. The old lawyer remained still. He did not need to speak. He simply let his question hang in the air, a perfect, glittering, and deadly thing. The captain finally found his voice. It was not the low rumble from before. It was a dry, rasping sound, the noise of a man drowning in a silent room. He began to stammer, to speak of mistakes, of a clerk's error, of a confusing process, but the words were weightless. They were dead leaves falling into the immense hole that had opened in the floor. The magistrate watched, his head tilted just so, a silent observer of the complete and quiet demolition of a man's credibility. The old lawyer held the silence for a moment longer. He then began to slowly, carefully roll the papyrus scroll closed. The sound of the paper was the only noise, a dry rustle that was the funeral song for a dead lie. He handed the small, neat cylinder back to the ship's captain. The captain took it, his hand trembling, his eyes fixed on the floor. The scroll was no longer a tool of his trade. It was a mark of his shame. Then the magistrate moved. For the first time in what seemed like an age, he shifted in his great wooden chair. The small sound of it, a slight groan of wood, broke the spell. He raised his head, and his gaze, cold and clear as winter ice, swept across the room. It passed over the broken captain. It rested for a moment on the plaintiff's lawyer, whose face was now a pale, blank mask. Finally, his eyes met those of the man of the house. The magistrate's voice came as dry and final as dust falling on a tomb. He spoke 2 words. Case dismissed. The words were not loud, but they landed with the force of a hammer blow. They shattered the tension. They cleared the air. The plaintiff's lawyer gave a stiff, almost imperceptible bow, the gesture of a man admitting defeat. The magistrate rose from his chair, a dark mountain of finality. His rising was the signal. The hearing was over. The clerk, who had been a statue by the door, came to life. He pulled back the heavy wool curtain. The sound of its rings on the bronze rod was a signal of release. The dim, quiet world of the great hall flooded back in, along with its distant, humming silence. The ordeal was done. The magistrate was gone, having melted through a small door behind his chair like a ghost fading at sunrise. The plaintiff and his lawyer did not look at each other. They were 2 separate islands of failure, drifting apart on a silent sea. They filed out of the chamber of judgment, their movements stiff and formal. The defeated witnesses followed, their faces pale and empty. The man of the house and his old lawyer were the last to step across the threshold. They moved from the close, dark air of the chamber into the cool, cavernous breath of the great hall. The change was immense. It was like surfacing from a deep, dark body of water into the open air. He stopped and turned to his lawyer. Words were unnecessary. He gave a single, deep nod, a gesture that contained all his gratitude. The old lawyer's face, which had been a mask of intense concentration, softened. A small, tired smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the smile of a master craftsman who has seen his careful work hold true. Across the vast stone floor, he watched his opponents retreat. The proud lawyer walked alone, his back a rigid line of defiance. The broken captain and the nervous merchant hurried after him, two smaller boats caught in the wake of a sinking ship. They disappeared into the distant shadows of the hall, their shame swallowed by the immense space. He and his lawyer were alone now. The great hall was almost empty, its business done for the day. The only movement was the slow, eternal dance of dust in the long shafts of afternoon light. The victory was not a loud, triumphant thing. It was a quiet release, a slow unwinding of a tightly coiled spring. He had walked into this building under a dark cloud. He would walk out under a clear sky. They began the long walk back across the great hall. Their footsteps were the only sound, two sets of soft leather on hard stone, a quiet rhythm in the vast, empty space. The shafts of light from the high windows were longer now, slanted and golden with the slow approach of evening. They were warm, dusty pillars that held up the cool, shadowed ceiling. The air was thin and clear. The heavy, charged atmosphere of the hearing had evaporated, leaving only the ancient scent of marble and time. They walked past the silent, sleeping columns, past the scribes' empty tables. The great building felt like a giant at rest, its work for the day complete, its great lungs now breathing slowly and deeply. As they neared the entrance, the city began to call to them. At first, it was a low hum, the faintest memory of a roar. Then it grew, resolving itself into the familiar sounds of wheels and voices and life. They reached the great doorway and stood for a moment on the threshold, two men in the deep shade looking out into a world of golden light. He stepped from the cool stone onto the high marble steps. The heat of the day had softened. The sun was a warm hand on his face, no longer a burning weight. The roar of the square was gentler now, the afternoon song of a city winding down. His old lawyer turned to him. The tired smile returned, a quiet and profound thing. He placed a hand on his client's shoulder, a brief, warm pressure of shared success. Then, with a final nod, he turned and descended the steps, melting into the slow-moving river of people. The man of the house stood alone for a moment, watching him go. He breathed in the air of the city, a rich and complex perfume of dust and food and life. The weight was gone from his shoulders. The battle was won. It was time to go home. He descended the steps, leaving the cool shadow of the great hall behind him. He walked into a world that had been reborn in gold. The square, which that morning had been a brutal desert of white-hot stone, was now a warm and gentle plain. The sun was low and kind, and it painted the marble buildings in hues of honey and pale orange. The roar of the city had softened to a murmur. It was the sound of a great beast, its day of hunting done, settling into a comfortable slumber. He retraced his steps, walking back through the memory of his morning's journey. But the path was not the same, because he was not the same. The narrow streets, which had seemed like oppressive canyons of stone, now felt like cool, sheltering arms. The long shadows that stretched across his path were rivers of soft blue shade, a welcome relief. The scents of the city were no longer a chaotic assault. The sharp smell of garlic from a cookshop was now a promise of an evening meal. The scent of hot bread from a bakery was the smell of comfort, of home. The sounds were a gentler music. The shout of a vendor was a single, cheerful note in a vast, sprawling song. The laughter of children playing in a doorway was a melody of pure, simple joy. His feet felt light on the cobblestones. The invisible armor of dread he had worn all day had dissolved, leaving him feeling clean and hollow. He was not a warrior returning from battle. He was a man returning to his life. He saw the familiar turn in the lane that led to his own street. He was leaving the grand public stage of the city and returning to the quiet theater of his own home. He was a ship battered by a sudden storm, now sailing into a calm and peaceful harbor. He turned the final corner, and the world changed completely. The street was his own. It was a quiet tributary far from the city's main current. The houses here were not leaning towers of brick, but solid, respectable homes, each one a small, private kingdom. And there, at the end of the lane, was his own door. It was a simple thing of dark wood, but in the warm, golden light of the setting sun, it seemed to glow with a quiet welcome. The light spilled across the face of his house, turning the pale stone to the color of warm honey. The shadow of his home stretched long across the street, a cool, dark carpet rolled out just for him. The air here was different. The raw, chaotic perfume of the city had faded, replaced by something cleaner, more personal. He could smell the sweet perfume of the roses his wife tended in their garden. He could smell the faint, clean scent of water on stone from the central basin. And underneath it all, a whisper of wood smoke from his own kitchen hearth, a promise of warmth and sustenance. His footsteps, which had been lost in the city's roar, now sounded clear and distinct on the familiar stones. They were the only sound, a solitary rhythm in the deep, velvet quiet of the evening. This was the border. This was the line between the world that belonged to everyone and the world that belonged only to him. He had faced the city's dangers, had navigated its treacherous currents, and had returned. He felt the last of the day's tension dissolve like mist in the morning sun. He reached the door. It was solid and cool under his hand. He raised his fist and knocked, a soft, familiar sound against the wood. He was a traveler, finally home. He did not have to wait long. From the other side of the dark wood came the familiar, welcome sound of the bronze bolt being drawn. It was a solid, reassuring noise, the sound of a key turning in the lock of his own life. The door swung inward without a sound. It opened not onto the world, but into a deep and gentle quiet. The old servant who had shaved him that morning stood there. The servant's face was unreadable, a lifetime of patient service worn like a mask. But in his eyes there was a flicker of something, a quiet question. The man of the house stepped across the threshold. He moved from the last golden light of the fading day into the warm, honeyed glow of his own home. The door closed behind him. The sound of it shutting was soft, but it was the most final sound in the world. It shut out the city. It shut out the law courts and the lying witnesses and the weight of public life. He was home. The air inside was a different substance entirely. It was thick with the scent of roasting meat and herbs from the kitchen, a smell that spoke of sustenance and care. It carried the perfume of the last roses of the day, their fragrance drifting in from the garden. The light from the central opening was soft and slanted now, a single, warm brushstroke across the mosaic floor. The basin of water was a sheet of liquid gold, reflecting a sky that was turning the color of a deep, sweet wine. He saw his wife. She was standing at the edge of the garden, her form a soft silhouette against the deepening twilight. She had been waiting. She did not move, did not speak. He did not need her to. Her stillness was a welcome, her presence a victory speech. The long day was over. The journey was done. The man of the house was home, and the silent, breathing walls of his small kingdom closed around him like a warm embrace. He walked toward his wife, his footsteps soft on the mosaic floor. He moved from the last golden light of the entrance hall into the deeper, softer gloom of the garden courtyard. The day was a story that was now over, a book that had been closed. The old servant followed him silently. The man paused and let the servant lift the heavy formal robe from his shoulders. It was the robe he had worn to the court, the garment that had absorbed the day's fear and tension. As it was taken away, he felt a final weight dissolve. He was lighter now, wearing only a simple linen tunic. A younger servant appeared as if from the shadows themselves. She carried a small clay lamp, its flame a tiny captured star. She moved to the lamps set on pedestals around the courtyard, touching her flame to their wicks. One by one, small suns bloomed in the growing darkness. The light they cast was warm and alive. It danced on the painted walls, making the old gods seem to whisper secrets. It turned the leaves of the fig tree into polished jade. He walked to the central basin. The water was cool and dark now, a perfect mirror for the sky above, which was the color of a deep violet bruise, pricked by the first faint stars. He dipped his hands into the water. It was a cold, clean shock. He washed his face, the water a blessed release, cleansing him of the city's dust and the day's long trial. The air was thick with the promise of the evening meal. The scent of rosemary and roasting meat was a rich, comforting tapestry. The sharp, clean smell of burning olive oil from the new lamps joined it, the perfume of domestic peace. The house was settling around him. It was a great, gentle beast, curling up for the night. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of the soft, quiet sounds of his own life. The day was done. He had returned. He turned from the cool water, his face still damp, and looked at his wife. She had moved from the shadows and now stood in the warm circle of a lamp's glow. The light was kind to her. It caught the silver threads in her dark hair and softened the lines of concern around her eyes. She had been waiting all day, a silent partner in his struggle. She did not ask about the verdict. She did not need to. Her question was simpler, and it held everything. "Are you weary?" she asked. Her voice was the first note of a quiet evening song, a sound that washed away the last echoes of the courtroom's harsh, brittle words. He shook his head, a gesture that was not entirely true, but true enough in this moment of return. Before he could speak, another figure appeared. His son stepped from the darkened doorway of the study, a scroll held loosely in one hand. The boy's face was still smooth with the innocence of youth, untouched by the day's sharp-edged conflicts. He saw his father, and a slow smile spread across his face, a pure and uncomplicated thing. The boy came forward and held out the scroll. "Listen to this line," he said, his voice full of the quiet pride of a young scholar. "The sea, tired of its own great noise, sleeps on the shore." The man took the scroll. The papyrus was smooth under his fingers. He read the line his son had copied. In the boy's careful script, the words seemed new and full of a simple, profound truth. He looked from the words to his son's hopeful face, and then to his wife's gentle smile. This was the harbor. This was the shore where the sea of his day could finally sleep. A servant appeared, a silent ghost in the lamplight, to announce that the evening meal was ready. His wife took his arm. Her touch was a warm, firm anchor. Together, the three of them moved across the courtyard, a small constellation of warmth and life, toward the soft glow of the dining room. The day had been about defense, about protecting his name and fortune. But this walk, in the quiet of his own home, with the scent of bread in the air and his family beside him, this was what he had truly been defending. This was the victory. They entered the dining room. It was not a grand hall for feasting, but a small, warm cave of a room, lined with paintings of peaceful country scenes. The air was soft and fragrant, thick with the rich scent of roasted lamb and rosemary. 3 couches, covered in soft, dark wool, were arranged around a low table of polished wood. The table was a landscape of simple abundance, a platter of roasted meat still sending up a faint ribbon of steam, a bowl of dark olives gleaming with oil, a loaf of bread, its crust a deep and comforting brown, and a clay pitcher of wine, its surface cool with evening dew. He reclined on his couch, the cushions yielding beneath him, and felt the last knots of the long day begin to dissolve. The hard marble of the law courts was a distant, cold memory. Here, everything was soft wood and warm wool. A servant, moving with the silent grace of a shadow, filled his cup with wine. The liquid was the color of a dark jewel in the lamplight. He raised the cup and drank. The wine was strong and slightly sweet, the taste of his own vineyards, the taste of home. He took a piece of bread, its texture a familiar comfort in his hand. For a few moments, no one spoke. The only sounds were the soft clink of a cup, the quiet chewing of bread. It was a silence not of tension, but of deep and profound contentment. His son, his mouth full of bread, began to speak of a passage he had read, his youthful voice full of passion for old words. His wife spoke of a new rose that had bloomed in the garden that afternoon, its color a shade of red she had never seen before. The conversation was a gentle stream washing over the sharp rocks of the day. The man listened and ate and drank. The world of accusations and defenses, of lies and shifting truths, seemed to be 1,000 miles away. In this warm, lighted room, there was only the simple, solid reality of bread and wine and family. He ate slowly, tasting everything as if for the first time. The roasted lamb was tender, seasoned with herbs that spoke of sunny, wind-swept hillsides. It was a taste of simple truth, a stark and welcome contrast to the day's diet of carefully constructed lies. He picked up a dark, wrinkled olive. Its salty, pungent flavor was a small, sharp explosion of reality. This was real. The cool, smooth texture of the cup in his hand was real. The warmth of the wine spreading through his chest was real. These were the anchors of his world, the things that could not be twisted by a clever lawyer's tongue. Outside the small, warm room, the great city was a distant memory, a story told in a foreign land. The roar of the square, the cold silence of the courthouse, the nervous sweat of the witnesses, all of it seemed to belong to another man's life. Here, the only sounds were the soft scrape of a knife on a platter, the gentle murmur of his son's voice describing a hero from a story, the quiet sigh of his wife as she savored a sip of wine. He watched the lamplight flicker. It made the painted grapevines on the wall seem to sway in a gentle, invisible breeze. It softened the edges of the world, wrapping the small room in a blanket of warm, golden quiet. A deep and profound weariness began to settle in his bones. It was a tiredness he had held at bay all day, a heavy coat he had not allowed himself to feel. Now, in the safety of this room, he could finally let it fall from his shoulders. He felt its weight, the true cost of the day's battle. And in that weariness there was a deep and abiding peace. The meal was almost over, the plates were nearly empty. The battle was won, not in the cold marble hall, but here, in this small, warm room, with the simple act of breaking bread. The last of the wine was poured and drunk. A servant, moving with the quiet efficiency of a moth, cleared the remnants of the meal. The plates vanished into the shadows, taking the last vestiges of the day with them. The family rose, their movements slow and heavy with contentment and fatigue. The gentle stream of conversation had run its course, ending in a deep and peaceful silence. They walked from the warm cocoon of the dining room back into the heart of the now sleeping house. The lamps in the great hall had been extinguished. The only light was the distant, cold silver of the moon filtering down from the high opening, turning the basin of water into a pool of liquid night. His son, his mind already full of the heroes and poets of his books, gave a soft good night and disappeared into the darkness of his own room. The man and his wife walked the last few steps to their chamber. The old servant was waiting, a single lamp held aloft, his face a calm and patient mask in the gloom. He opened the door for them. They stepped inside. The heavy crimson curtain was drawn, a final soft wall against the world. The room was a deep, quiet cave, holding the day's last warmth. He felt the cool linen of the sheets against his skin, a final, blessed comfort. The weight of his own body was immense, a heavy anchor pulling him down into the soft depths of the mattress. His wife's hand found his in the darkness, a simple, solid reassurance. His mind, which had been a battlefield all day, was now a quiet, empty field under a sky full of stars. The last thoughts that drifted through it were not of laws or lies. They were the taste of honeyed wine, the feel of clean water, the sound of his son's voice reading a line of poetry. The great city, the empire, the whole noisy world had faded to a single, distant, sleeping heartbeat. And he let go, sinking into the deep, dark, dreamless ocean of the night. The house held its breath, sinking with him into the deep well of the night. In the master's chamber, the darkness was absolute, a soft velvet weight. The last lamp had been extinguished, its final curl of smoke a parting soul that vanished into the still air. Throughout the great house, the other small sons were dying too. Servants moved like ghosts on their final rounds, their bare feet whispering on the cold mosaics. They snuffed the flames, returning the corridors and rooms to the dominion of the shadows. The painted figures on the walls were finally still, their bright myths and heroic battles paused in the profound gloom. The last echoes of the day faded, the clatter from the kitchen was gone, the murmur of voices was a memory. The only sound was the slow, deep breathing of the house itself. The air grew cool. It carried the scent of wood smoke from the dying embers in the kitchen hearth. It carried the clean, damp smell of the garden leaves, wet with night dew. From the central opening in the roof, a single, perfect square of night looked down. It was filled with cold, distant stars, tiny chips of diamond scattered on black velvet. Outside, the city had followed the house into slumber. The great roar had dwindled to a murmur, then a whisper, and finally a profound and hollow silence. The 7 hills were once again sleeping giants, their temples pale bones in the moonlight. The streets were empty rivers of stone, washed clean of the day's frantic currents. A lone dog barked, a single sharp sound that only made the quiet seem deeper. The moon, a silent silver eye, looked down upon it all. It saw a world at rest, a great and complex machine whose gears had finally stopped turning. Everything waited. The city, the house, the man, all were adrift on the same dark, silent tide, waiting for the first faint promise of the dawn to call them back to the shore of another day. The darkness was complete now, a deep and bottomless well. The night was no longer a visitor. It was the owner of the world. A vast and profound silence reigned, a quiet so immense it seemed to have a weight of its own, settling over the city like a blanket of soft, dark snow. In the grand Roman house, sleep was a tideless ocean. The master of the house drifted in its deepest currents, finally free from the sharp edges of the day. His dreams were empty rooms, swept clean of conflict and worry. In another chamber, his son sailed on a brighter sea, his mind a small, brave ship exploring islands of myth and poetry. The servants, in their simple beds, floated on gentler tides, their dreams filled with the faces of forgotten villages and the taste of their mother's bread. The house itself was dreaming. It dreamed in stone and wood. It dreamed of all the lives it had sheltered, of all the whispered secrets its walls had heard. Outside, the moon continued its slow, silent patrol across the heavens. Its light was a cool, ghostly river flowing over the sleeping city. It washed over the empty squares and silent temples, turning the world into a landscape of silver and deep shadow. It touched the stone faces of the statues, giving them a brief, cold life, making them the lonely audience for the world's slumber. There was no sound, The distant bark of the dog was long gone. The air was still and cold, scrubbed clean of the day's heat and haste. It smelled only of damp earth and cool stone and the vast, clean emptiness of the night sky. This was the heart of the night, the moment of absolute rest. It was the pause between the last beat of yesterday's heart and the first beat of tomorrow's. The great engine of the empire was still. Its countless fires were banked, its endless arguments forgotten. A day had been lived, a story had been told, and now there was only this perfect, silent, and dreamless sleep. The tide of night reached its highest point. The world was submerged in a deep and profound stillness. There was nothing left of the day, not even a memory. The moon, a worn silver coin, began its slow descent toward the edge of the world. Its journey was silent, its light a final gentle touch on the sleeping rooftops. It saw the great city breathing slowly, its millions of lives paused in the great silence. It saw the grand Roman house, a small dark shape, holding its own precious cargo of dreams. And it saw the man within, lost in the deepest part of his rest, his story for the day now folded and put away. Time itself seemed to have stopped. The great clock of the empire was motionless. The future was a distant shore, not yet visible. There was only this moment, this perfect, endless moment of quiet. But even the deepest night holds a promise. In the east, beyond the sleeping hills, a single, faint thread of violet began to weave itself into the black edge of the sky. It was a change so small it was almost invisible. It was a thought that had not yet become a word. It was the first, quiet whisper of the coming dawn. The journey through the day was over. The journey through the night was ending. A new day waited, silent and unseen, ready to begin the story all over again. That first faint promise of the dawn was a patient thing. It did not rush. The thin line of violet on the horizon slowly bled into the dark fabric of the night, a single thread of color widening with imperceptible slowness. The stars did not fall from the sky. They were erased one by one, as if a great gentle hand were wiping the slate clean for a new day's lesson. The moon, a pale ghost of its former self, faded into the growing light, its silver magic undone by the simple, honest approach of the sun. The world was still held in a profound quiet. The silence was not an absence of noise. It was a presence, a deep and ancient entity that had reigned for hours. But its kingdom was shrinking. The light was a slow and quiet invasion. First, it touched the highest peaks of the 7 hills. The white marble of the temples, which had been bones in the moonlight, now caught this new, ethereal glow. They flushed with a soft, rosy pink, like flowers waking from a long sleep. The light crept downward, a slow and silent waterfall, spilling over the dark rooftops of the sleeping city. It traced the edges of the arches and colonnades, giving them back their shape and form. Inside the grand Roman house, the world was also changing. In the central hall, the square of night sky reflected in the basin of water was no longer a perfect inky black. It was a soft, deep grey, the colour of a dove's wing. The air in the house was cold and still. It held the memory of the night's deep chill. Nothing moved, not a curtain, not a leaf. The sleeping family and their servants were still lost in their separate dreams, unaware of the great and silent transformation happening just beyond their shuttered windows. The city was a vast and empty stage. The lighting was changing, the backdrop being painted. Everything was poised, waiting. The moment of perfect balance between night and day was almost here. The world held its breath, ready for the first sound to break the spell. And then the spell was broken. From a distant hill, a single rooster crowed. The sound was thin and sharp, a crack in the immense crystal bell of the silence. It was not a call to action, but a lonely question asked of the pale, empty sky. For a long moment, there was no answer. The quiet rushed back in, trying to heal the small wound the sound had made, but the charm was gone. The perfect stillness was now a memory. Another sound followed, closer this time. It was the scrape of metal on stone, a baker clearing the ashes from his oven. The noise was rough and practical, a sound of work, of sustenance. It was the first gear turning in the great sleeping machine of the city. Soon after, a wooden shutter creaked open somewhere in the maze of dark alleys, a single eye opening to the new day. These were not loud noises. They were whispers in a vast and silent cathedral. They did not conquer the quiet. They gave it shape. They defined its edges. The silence was no longer a solid thing. It was a vast, still ocean, and these first sounds were tiny ripples spreading slowly across its surface. The air itself seemed to listen. It carried these first notes over the empty rooftops and through the deserted streets. It brought them to the walls of the grand Roman house. But here, the sounds were still ghosts, too faint to pass through the thick stone. Inside, the world was still deep in slumber. The master and his family slept on, undisturbed. Their dreams were a final, fragile barrier against the returning world. The house was an island, and the first slow tides of the day were just beginning to touch its shores. The light grew bolder. The soft rose on the hilltops deepened, then spilled down into the city like a slow, silent flood of pale wine. It poured over the rooftops and into the streets, chasing the last deep shadows from the alleyways. The empty public square, the heart of the world, was a vast and shallow bowl, slowly filling with this new, clean light. The statues of the emperors, who had been dark silhouettes against the dawn, now began to take on form. The light caught the bronze of a raised arm, the marble fold of a robe. Their stone eyes, which had stared into the long darkness, now seemed to gaze upon a world being born anew. Silence was still the emperor of this hour, but its reign was ending. It was a thinner, more fragile silence now, a quiet that was listening for its own demise. It held the memory of the first rooster's crow and the first baker's scrape. The air, cool and thin, began to carry the first messages of the waking city. A faint, warm breath from a distant bakery, the scent of yeast and promise. The clean, sharp smell of damp earth from 1,000 unseen gardens. Every door was still closed. Every window was a dark, unblinking eye. The city was a vast and intricate musical instrument, its strings untouched, waiting for the first touch of the musician's hand. Soon, the sun itself would crest the hills. It would send its first true rays to strike the stones, to call the people from their beds. The countless threads of 1,000,000 lives would begin to be woven together again into the complex tapestry of a Roman day. But for now there was only this perfect, hollow and expectant stillness. This last, deep breath before the great and endless story began all over again. Then, at last, it came. Over the dark shoulder of the eastern hills, the sun lifted its head. It was not a sudden violence. It was a slow, majestic coronation. A single, pure ray of gold leaped across the sky. It struck the highest point of the tallest temple, turning its gilded roof into a star that had fallen to earth. The light did not rush. It poured, a slow and silent river of liquid gold, flowing down from the hills, filling the empty streets, washing over the pale, sleeping faces of the statues. The gentle pinks and soft violets of the dawn were consumed, burned away by this new, brilliant fire. The long, soft shadows of the night drew back in fear. They sharpened into crisp, dark lines, retreating into the spaces between the columns and the narrow mouths of the alleys. A new sound joined the city's quiet. From across the river, a blacksmith's hammer began to fall, its rhythm a steady and patient heartbeat. It was the sound of purpose, of a day's work beginning. The air itself seemed to change. The cool, damp smell of the night was warmed by this new light. It began to carry the scent of wood smoke from 100 newly lit hearths, a sign that the city's vast and complex life was stirring in its sleep. Inside the walls of the grand Roman house, the deep darkness began to yield. It was not a sudden awakening. It was a quiet surrender. Through the tiny cracks around the heavy wooden shutters, the first thin blades of golden light pierced the gloom. They lay across the cold stone floors like fallen swords. They were silent messengers, bringing news of the world outside. They were gentle fingers, touching the eyelids of the sleepers, whispering that the night was over, that the day had come. That thin blade of light found its way to the master's chamber. It touched his closed eyelids, not with a sudden shock, but with a gentle, persistent warmth. The deep ocean of his sleep began to recede, its dark waters pulling back from the shores of his consciousness. The last remnants of a dream, a silent and featureless landscape, dissolved into the growing light. He took a slow breath, the first conscious breath of a new day. He opened his eyes. The familiar crimson of the curtain was there, but it was no longer a shield against the darkness. It was a thin, glowing veil backlit by the new sun. In the smaller rooms of the house, the same silent summons was being answered. A young servant girl sat up on her simple mat, her awakening not a response to a sound, but to the light itself, a clock woven into the very fabric of the world. The house was breathing in. The distant hammer began its familiar song, the steady heartbeat of the waking city. But now there were other sounds, closer and more intimate. The soft scrape of a stool in the kitchen below, the gentle clink of pottery, the quiet whisper of bare feet on the cool stone floor. The great and complex machine of the household was stirring, its gears turning slowly, quietly, preparing the stage for the day's play. The triumphs and trials of yesterday were a story already told, a book already shelved. Today was a new page, clean and unmarked. The man in the great bed did not move. He simply lay there, in the quiet space between sleep and waking, listening to his world being born again around him. The journey was over, and the journey was just beginning. He pushed the heavy blankets aside. The cool morning air touched his skin, a gentle summons. The day was here, and he rose to meet it. He was one man, in one house, in one city, but his waking was the waking of the world. Outside his door, the household moved with a quiet and practiced rhythm, a dance as old as the house itself. In the street beyond, the first of his clients were already gathering, their faces turned toward his door, their hopes a new and growing tide. The trickle of noise became a stream, then a river, then a roaring flood. The city, which had been a hollow drum, was now sounding its endless, vibrant rhythm. The baker's shouts, the blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of 1,000 carts, the murmur of 1,000,000 conversations, all rose together. They became a single great song, the music of the empire. The public square, once a silent desert, was now a swarming sea of humanity. The sun, a golden sovereign, climbed its high throne in the sky, looking down upon its vast and intricate kingdom. It shone on the rich man in his litter and the beggar in the alley. It warmed the marble of the temples and the rough brick of the apartment blocks. It illuminated the same stories, the same struggles, the same small victories, all being played out again under its patient gaze. The great wheel had turned. The day, which had died in darkness, had been reborn in light, and the endless, breathing, beautiful, and terrible story of Rome began once more. The story of this day is just one thread. It is woven into a tapestry 1,000 miles wide. The same sun that warmed the law courts now touches the face of a soldier. He stands on a cold stone wall at the edge of the world. It shines on a farmer in a distant valley, his hands deep in the rich, dark earth. It glints on the nets of a fisherman, pulling his living from a sea of impossible blue. Each of them has a story of hope, of fear, of work, of love. A million different stories, all unfolding at once under the same sky. The great city, with its noise and its passion, is the heart of it all. But from here, from this quiet place, its roar softens. It becomes a distant hum, the gentle turning of a great wheel. It is the sound of life itself, a vast and soothing lullaby. The man in his house, the merchant in his shop, the emperor in his palace, they are all just notes in this immense and ancient song, a song that will continue long after we have stopped listening. And so, you can let go now. Let the details fade. Let the colors soften and blur. The story will be here tomorrow, but for now, the day is done. The city breathes, the empire dreams, and the quiet harbor of sleep is waiting to welcome you home. The memory of the sun is a fading warmth. The echo of the city's song is a distant, sleeping pulse. Let it all drift away now like smoke from a dying candle. The grand halls of justice are empty and still. The busy square is a silent, moon-drenched dream. The faces of the people, the farmer and the soldier, the merchant and the servant, all blur and soften into a gentle, flowing river of sleep. There is no story left to tell. The last page has been turned. The book of the day is closed. There is only the deep and profound quiet of the night, a quiet as vast as the empire itself, stretching from the hot southern sands to the cold northern forests. It is a silence made of a million sleeping breaths. It is a peace built on the foundation of a world at rest. Feel the slow, gentle tide of that peace as it washes over you. It carries away the sharp edges of the day, leaving only smooth, worn stones. It pulls you gently from the shore of wakefulness, out into a calm and starless sea. There are no more journeys to be made. There are no more battles to be won. There is only the slow and steady rhythm of your own breathing, a gentle rise and fall, a slow and easy current. You are a boat on a quiet harbor, your anchor down, your sails at rest. The great, turning wheel of the world has slowed, it has stopped, and you can let go. Drift now, far away from the sunlit streets and the moonlit rooftops, far away from the world of marble and men. Drift into the deep, dark, comfortable silence. The silence of sleep, the peace of rest. Let go and sleep. The final echo is gone. The last thread of light has dissolved. There is nothing left now but the darkness, a soft and quiet darkness, a warm and comfortable darkness. It is a gentle blanket covering everything. Let it cover you now. The story has faded. The city is a forgotten dream. The world is a distant sleeping star. Let it all go. Let the last thoughts drift away. Let them become steam in the cool night air. Let them melt into the deep and profound quiet. There is only the slow, easy rhythm of your breathing now, a gentle wave on a silent sea, a soft rise and fall, in and out. Let go of the world. Let go of the day. There is nothing left to do. There is nowhere left to go. There is only this quiet, this peace, this deep and gentle rest. Drift now, float, rest, sleep. The great empire sleeps. Its cities are dark islands in a sea of night, their fires banked, their voices still. But something else lies awake under the cold and watchful moon. The roads. The long, white roads. They are rivers of stone flowing silently through the sleeping countryside. Their surfaces, made of a million fitted stones, gleam with a faint, ghostly light. Each stone, worn smooth by the passage of 1,000 years, holds the chill of the night air. The thunder of marching legions is a ghost now, a faint vibration you can feel only in your deepest memory. The rumble of a merchant's cart, heavy with the silks of the east or the amber of the north, is a forgotten dream. The roads are arteries of silence, connecting a sleeping heart to its sleeping limbs. They stretch for 1,000 miles and then 1,000 more. They bind the hot southern sands to the misty northern forests. They climb over mountains that touch the stars. They cross wide, slow rivers on bridges of stone that seem to have grown from the earth itself. They are the memory of the empire, written in stone and dust. They remember the hurried footsteps of the messenger, his news of victory or defeat a heavy weight in his pouch. They remember the slow, shuffling tread of the pilgrim, his heart a small lamp against the great darkness. They remember the homesick soldier walking toward a home he may never see again. The roads hold all these stories, all these lives in their silent, stony hearts. They wait. Under the slow, eternal turning of the stars, they wait for the dawn. They wait for the first traveler to disturb their quiet. They wait for the journey to begin once more. Along one of these great sleeping arteries, a small inn huddles by the side of the road. It is a lonely island of slumber in a vast, dark sea. Its wooden walls, weathered by 100 years of sun and rain, are the color of deep shadow. Its thatched roof is heavy with night dew, each straw a tiny silver thread in the moonlight. The inn is breathing. You can almost feel it, a slow and quiet exhalation of cold air from its shuttered windows and closed door. The sign above the doorway, a faded painting of a cheerful-looking boar, is now just a dark, featureless shape, its promise of welcome and warmth forgotten until the morning. In the common room, the fire is a bed of grey ash, its heat a faint memory. The air smells of spilled wine and old wood smoke and the sweet, cloying scent of beeswax from a snuffed-out candle. The empty benches and tables are silent witnesses to yesterday's laughter and arguments. Upstairs, in small, simple rooms, the travellers are adrift. A merchant dreams not of profits, but of the small garden behind the house he left a month ago. A government courier, his urgent message safe in its leather tube, dreams he is a boy again, chasing birds through a sunlit field. A family, migrating to a new and unknown province, dreams together of a place that feels like home. Their separate journeys, their distinct hopes and fears, have all been surrendered to the same great, democratic quiet of sleep. In the stable behind the inn, the animals are silent. A horse twitches in a dream of running. An ox sighs a deep and rumbling sound that is swallowed by the night. The great road waits beside them all. It is a patient, silent river, and this small inn is a boat, moored for a few brief hours in the calm and peaceful harbour of the night. The small inn is a dream of warmth in a cold, vast land. Beyond its walls, the countryside lies open to the sky, a patchwork of fields and forests sleeping under the moon's pale gaze. The fields, their harvests long gathered, are empty pages waiting for the story of a new spring. The moonlight washes over them, turning the dark, ploughed earth to a soft, luminous grey. Not far from the road, a large country estate sleeps. Its whitewashed walls are like polished bone in the darkness. Within those walls, the father of the family dreams not of law courts, but of the slow turning of the seasons. He dreams of the taste of rain on the wind and the warmth of the sun on his face. His worries are older, tied to the earth and the sky. The road continues its silent journey. It passes through an olive grove where the trees are ancient, twisted shapes. They are gnarled old men, their arms outstretched, their silver leaves trembling in a breeze you cannot feel. The air here smells of cool, dry dust and the faint, peppery scent of the olive leaves themselves. The road then skirts the edge of a deep wood. The trees here are tall and close together, their branches a thick roof that the moonlight cannot pierce. The darkness within is absolute, a place of deep, secret quiet. From that darkness comes the sudden, soft call of an owl, a question asked of the night. A small stream, its voice a liquid whisper, runs alongside the road for a time. Its water is black as ink, but it catches the starlight in 1,000 tiny, shattered pieces. The great road is the thread that ties all these sleeping places together, the inn, the fields, the great house, the ancient grove, the dark wood. They are all beads on a long, silent string, waiting patiently for the return of the sun. The great road is a pale ribbon thrown across a sleeping world. It has forgotten the sun. It knows only the cool, white light of the moon. The milestones that mark its passage are silent grey sentinels. Their carved numbers, which tell the traveller how far he has come and how far he has yet to go, are filled with shadow. They are unreadable secrets in the night. The road does not care for destinations now. It is only a journey through an immense and profound quiet. The land on either side is a vast, empty canvas. The hills are gentle waves on a dark, frozen sea. The valleys between them are troughs of deep, velvet blackness. There is no movement. A fox, a silent hunter, might be a flicker of shadow in the far distance, but you cannot see him. The air is so still you can almost feel its shape. It is a great, invisible bell, and the world is held inside it. If you were to listen, you would hear nothing, not the rustle of a leaf. Not the sigh of the wind. The wind itself has gone to sleep in some distant cave. It has left the world to its stillness. The sky above is a bottomless well of blackness. The stars are not warm or friendly. They are tiny cold points of ice, scattered across an infinite distance. They are the eyes of eternity, looking down on a world that has paused its frantic turning. They see the road. They see the sleeping fields. They see the dark woods. They see a world empty of its own noise, a world returned to a state of grace. This is the empire without its people. It is a skeleton of stone and earth, beautiful in its silence. It is a great and intricate machine, its fires out, its gears at rest, waiting patiently under the cold, silent gaze of the stars. But the road does not end in the empty fields. It is a promise. It is a long, pale finger pointing through the darkness, always leading somewhere. It knows that the deep forests and sleeping farmlands are not the whole story. It remembers the cities. Far away now, a city sleeps, a dense knot of shadow in the vast, open land. The road is a vein, and that distant, sleeping city is the empire's still heart. Here, far out in the quiet land, you cannot hear its breath, but the road feels its pull. It is a river flowing toward a silent sea. The night has reached its peak. The silence is as deep as it will ever be, but the great, slow wheel of the sky has not stopped turning. The moon has begun its long, graceful fall toward the western edge of the world. The stars have shifted, their cold, diamond patterns sliding across the velvet darkness. There is a change in the air, a feeling so subtle it is more a memory than a sensation. It is the first hint that the tide of night, which has been flowing in for so many hours, will soon turn. The world does not know it yet. The sleeping traveller in the inn does not feel it. The dreaming farmer does not stir. But the road knows. The ancient stones, which have seen 10,000 suns rise, feel the change in their very substance. They hold the cold of the deepest night, but they wait for the first, faint warmth of the dawn. They are the patient memory of the world, and they remember that even the longest, darkest, and most silent night must always end. The silence held, but it was no longer a solid, seamless thing. It had become a thinning veil. A faint and subtle stirring began in the air, a phantom breeze that was more a memory of wind than wind itself. It was the first slow breath of the waking world. It touched the silver leaves of the olive trees, but they did not rustle. It passed over the sleeping fields like a ghost, leaving no trace on the cold, dark earth. This invisible current found the small inn by the side of the road. It was too gentle to make a shutter creak or a loose tile shift. But inside, in the deep and dreamless quiet, something responded. The merchant, lost in his slumber, gave a soft, low sigh. It was not a sound of waking, but a slight shallowing of his deep rest. The government courier, whose hand had been still all night, turned in his sleep, his fingers brushing against the cool leather of his message tube. These were the first unconscious stirrings, the first sign that the tide of sleep had reached its furthest shore and was now beginning, with infinite slowness, to recede. The old wood of the inn itself seemed to respond to the change in the air, letting out a single, low groan as it settled. It was the sound of a great, sleeping beast shifting in its slumber. Outside, the long, pale road remained empty. It remained silent. It did not move, but it felt these first tiny tremors. It had felt them 1,000,000 times before. It knew what they meant. The deepest point of the night had passed, and the slow, inevitable journey back toward the sun had begun. The eastern horizon was no longer a sealed black line. It had softened. A pale wound of violet appeared, bleeding upward into the deep indigo of the fading night. The stars, which had glittered like chips of ice, began to lose their sharp edges. They grew faint, one by one, like old memories dissolving into a brighter, newer thought. The moon was a pale, translucent wafer, its silver light diluted, its magic slowly draining away. This new light, a clean and colorless thing, crept across the sleeping land. It did not bring warmth, only clarity. The great road, which had been a ghostly ribbon, began to reclaim its solid form. You could see the individual stones now, their worn surfaces gleaming with a damp, cold light. You could see the dark lines of the mortar between them, the fine dust settled in the cracks. The hills, which had been indistinct waves of shadow, began to separate from the sky. Their gentle curves were etched against the growing light, their forms emerging from the dark soup of the night. Then the first true sound of the new day arrived. It was not a stirring from within the inn. It was a call from the land itself, from a small, unseen farmstead nestled in a distant fold of the earth. A rooster crowed. The sound was sharp and clear, a ragged tear in the thinning fabric of the silence. It was a lonely, defiant cry hurled at the pale and empty sky. For a moment the quiet seemed to rush back in, a vast and silent army trying to reclaim its lost territory. But it was too late. The spell was broken. The reign of the night was over. The rooster's call was an announcement, a herald's trumpet, sounding the arrival of a new king. The day was coming. The journey was about to begin. The rooster's call was a key turning in the lock of the new day. The silence did not shatter. It dissolved, slowly, like sugar in water. The light grew, no longer a pale wash, but a thin, golden liquid pouring over the world. It found the small, sleeping inn. It seeped through the cracks in the wooden shutters, painting thin, bright lines on the dusty air inside. In a small room upstairs, the government courier opened his eyes. The dream he had been visiting, a field of tall grass under a summer sun, vanished like a puff of smoke. He was left with the 4 rough wooden walls of his room and the cold, still air. He felt the chill of the morning through his thin wool blanket. He listened. The world outside the shuttered window was no longer silent. The rooster crowed again, closer now, more confident. And then a sound from within the inn itself. The low groan of a floorboard in the room below, followed by the soft, rhythmic scrape of a broom on wood. The innkeeper, or his wife, had begun the day's first chores. A moment later, a new scent joined the cold air. It was the smell of wood smoke, thin and sharp at first, then growing richer. A fire was being coaxed back to life in the common room hearth. The courier sat up. The coarse blanket scraped against his skin. His hand, by instinct, went to the leather tube that had slept beside him. It was there, solid, cool to the touch. It was the reason for his journey. It was his purpose. The small, familiar weight of it in his hand was an anchor in the new day. He swung his legs from the bed, his bare feet finding the cold, splintery wood of the floor. The inn was waking up. The brief, dreamless peace of the night was over. The journey, which had been paused, was about to begin again, and the great, silent road outside waited patiently to receive him. The sounds from below grew stronger. They were no longer whispers. They were the clear and honest noises of a world waking up. The crackle of the fire in the hearth was now a cheerful, hungry sound. It was a newborn sun born in a cave of stone, chasing the last of the night's chill from the common room. The scent of wood smoke was joined by a heartier perfume. It was the smell of coarse grain porridge bubbling in a pot, a simple, nourishing smell that spoke of the day's first energy. From the other rooms along the narrow, dark corridor, more sounds of life began to emerge. A low cough, the rustle of a straw mattress, the soft, sleepy murmur of a child's voice. The merchant, the family, the other solitary travellers, they were all being pulled from the deep waters of their dreams by the same gentle, insistent tide. The courier moved with a quiet efficiency. He pulled on his rough wool tunic, the familiar scratch of the fabric, a comfort. He strapped on his worn leather sandals. He wrapped his heavy cloak around his shoulders, a shield against the morning's lingering cold. He opened his door. The air in the hallway was dim and cool, but the warmth from the common room below was a tangible thing, a golden promise rising up the narrow stairs. He descended, his hand grazing the smooth, worn wood of the banister. The common room was a small island of flickering light and growing warmth. The innkeeper, a heavy man with a tired but kindly face, moved between the hearth and the tables. A few of the other travellers were already there, hunched on benches near the fire, their faces still soft with sleep. They held wooden bowls of steaming porridge, their movements slow and deliberate. No one spoke much. They were a silent congregation, sharing a final moment of warmth before scattering to the four winds. The courier took a bowl and a piece of hard, dark bread. He found a place away from the others, his back to the wall. He ate, quickly, without tasting. His eyes were on the inn's open doorway. Through it, he could see the great road, a pale, beckoning line in the new morning light. The world was awake. The journey was calling. He finished the last of the hard bread. The warmth of the porridge was a small, fading comfort in his stomach. He left the empty wooden bowl on the table, a silent thank you to the innkeeper. The small circle of firelight in the common room was a sanctuary, a temporary pause in a long and lonely story. But it was not his story. His story was waiting outside on the long, pale road. He pushed himself away from the table and walked toward the door. The other travellers did not look up. They were still wrapped in their own quiet worlds, their own slow goodbyes to the night. He stepped across the threshold, from the warm, smoky air of the inn into the clean, sharp cold of the new morning. The heavy wooden door closed behind him with a soft thud. The sound was a final, quiet note, cutting him off from the brief community of the inn. He was alone now. He stood for a moment, letting the cold air wash over his face. It smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke and the vast, clean emptiness of the waking land. The sun was not yet visible, but its light was everywhere. It was a thin golden wash that painted the world in shades of pale yellow and soft grey. The great road stretched before him, a solid path now, no longer a ghost. It seemed to pulse with a faint, expectant light, its stones cold and damp with the last of the night's dew. A bird called from a nearby tree, its song a series of clear, liquid notes scattered into the quiet air. From a far-off field, he heard the low, mournful call of an ox. These were the sounds of the countryside waking, a slow and ancient rhythm so different from the city's frantic roar. He pulled his heavy cloak tighter around his shoulders. He felt the familiar weight of the message tube against his side, his purpose, his direction. He took a single deep breath of the cold, clean air. And then he set foot upon the road. His first step was a silent commitment. His second was a promise. He began to walk, a small, solitary figure on a vast and empty stage. His journey was a single, moving thread, weaving its way through the immense, still tapestry of the dawn. His footsteps were the only clock in the quiet world. They were a steady, soft rhythm of leather on stone, the sound of a single human purpose. The great road accepted the sound without comment. Its surface was a mosaic of 1,000,000 small grey stones, still slick with the memory of the night's dew. On either side, the wild grasses were heavy with moisture, each blade a tiny silver spear, tipped with a diamond of cold water. He walked on. The world was still a landscape of soft edges and muted colours. The hills were gentle, sleeping beasts, their dark fur of trees just beginning to show its texture in the growing light. A thin veil of mist clung to the low places, a soft, white breath held in the valleys. He felt the cold air on his cheeks, a clean and honest cold that spoke of open spaces and the high, empty sky. His own breath was a small, white cloud that appeared for a moment and then vanished. He was a lonely engine of warmth in a great and silent landscape. Then the sun finally broke the line of the hills. It did not rise so much as it arrived, a silent explosion of pure golden light. The world was remade in an instant. The grey stones of the road turned to warm tan. The mist in the valleys was burned away, revealing the dark, rich earth of the fields below, and his shadow, which had been absent, leaped out before him. It was a long, thin, silent companion, stretching far down the road, pointing the way he had to go. The sun was a warm and welcome weight upon his shoulders. The lingering chill of the night, which had lived in the stones of the road, now fled from its touch. The dew on the wild grasses was set afire, 1,000,000 tiny diamonds that glittered for a moment and then vanished, returning to the air as a sweet, earthy steam. The road began to breathe a new scent. It was the smell of sun-warmed dust, a dry and ancient perfume. He walked into the heart of the morning. His shadow, a loyal and silent servant, walked faithfully before him. The rhythm of his journey was simple, the soft crunch of his leather sandals on the gravel, the steady rise and fall of his own breathing, the slight, familiar pull of the message pouch on his shoulder. This was his world now. In the vast green distance he saw the first sign of another life. A single, thin column of white smoke climbed into the blue sky from a farmhouse he could not see. The smoke spoke of a family waking, of a fire being lit, of a meal being prepared. The empire was not just its cities and its legions, it was this. 1,000 small, quiet lives, all connected by the long, patient threads of these roads. He passed a milestone, a simple cylinder of carved stone. It told him he had walked 5 miles since the last town. It was a silent conversation between him and the men who had built this road so long ago. The stone was warm to the touch. The day was growing. The road stretched on, a pale and dusty promise, disappearing into the heat that was just beginning to dance on the horizon. The sun climbed higher in the great blue bowl of the sky. The courier's shadow, which had been a long and slender companion, grew shorter. It retreated toward his feet, a loyal servant growing tired in the heat. The world was fully awake now. The air was no longer cool. It was warm and alive, and it shimmered above the stones of the road. The heat was a visible ghost, a trembling veil he had to walk through. He passed fields of young wheat, their green a brilliant, impossible color under the high sun. A light breeze born in some distant valley stirred the tops of the wheat, making the field move like a slow green sea. He crushed a wild herb with his sandal, and the sharp, clean scent of thyme rose to meet him, a small, spicy surprise in the clean, dry air. Far above, a hawk cried out, a single, piercing note that stitched the vast blue sky to the green earth. The sound did not break the silence. It only served to measure its immense depth. The road was a patient serpent of stone, basking in the sun's warmth. He saw where a heavy cart had passed not long before him. The deep ruts were carved into the dusty earth beside the paved way. He could almost smell the ghost of the sweating oxen that had pulled it. He was not alone on this road. He was just a single drop of water in a long, slow-moving river of travelers. He felt the steady work of his own body, the pull of the muscles in his legs, the easy rhythm of his breathing, the slight, constant chafe of the leather pouch against his side. The message it contained was a small, secret fire he carried within him, and the road stretched on. It was a line drawn by a god's unerring hand, straight to the horizon, a promise of more miles, more sun, more dust, more of the endless, silent, and beautiful work of the empire. The sun was a silent, heavy hammer at the top of the sky. The world had fallen into the deep, buzzing quiet of midday. The hawk was gone. The breeze had died. The only movement was the shimmering dance of heat above the stones. The only sound was the drowsy hum of insects in the tall, dry grass. The courier walked on, his focus narrowed to the pale ribbon of road and the steady rhythm of his own heart. Then a new sound grew from the shimmering air behind him. It was a slow and patient sound, the groan of wood and the tired sigh of heavy beasts. It was the jingle of a bronze harness and the low, indistinct murmur of a human voice. He did not need to turn. The road was a shared story, and he knew this chapter well. He kept his pace, and the sounds grew louder, closer. Soon the shadow of the newcomer fell over him, a brief, welcome respite from the sun. He drew alongside the slow-moving island of commerce. Two great oxen, their hides the color of dust, pulled a cart laden with clay jars and bundled hides. The merchant, a man whose face was a map of dusty roads, walked beside his animals, his hand resting on the warm flank of the lead ox. He gave the courier a slow, tired nod. The courier returned the gesture, a silent greeting between two different servants of the Empire's vast machine. The courier was a swift nerve, carrying a single, urgent message. The merchant was the slow blood, carrying the life-sustaining goods of the world. As he passed, a new scent cut through the dry air. It was the rich, exotic perfume of spices sealed in the clay jars, a ghost of a faraway port city, a memory of a ship's hold. He left the small, slow world of the cart behind him. The sound of its groaning wheels faded, replaced once more by the solitary rhythm of his own footsteps. The road ahead was empty again, but it was not the same. It was populated now by the ghost of that merchant and the distant memory of spice. The road was a river, and he had just passed another soul, floating on the same slow, sun-drenched current. The sun, which had been a hammer, was now a painter's brush. It began its long, slow slide down the western wall of the sky, and the quality of the light began to change. The fierce, white glare softened into a warmer, more forgiving gold. The courier's shadow, which had huddled at his feet during the high noon, began to stretch out again. This time it was behind him, a long, dark follower, a silent record of the miles he had already travelled. The road, which had been a straight, hot line through open fields, now led him to the mouth of a forest. He stepped from the bright, open heat into a world of cool, green shadow. The change was instant and absolute. The air, which had been hot and dusty, was now cool and damp. It smelled of pine needles and rich, dark earth and the slow, patient decay of 1,000 autumns. The sun was not gone. It was shattered, broken into a million pieces of dappled light that danced on the forest floor, a trembling golden mosaic. His footsteps, which had been a crisp crunch on the open road, were now a soft, muffled thud on a bed of fallen pine needles. The silence here was different. It was a deep, green, living quiet, full of the rustle of unseen things and the whisper of the wind in the high canopy. He felt the long day in his bones now. The fatigue was no longer a distant threat. It was a quiet companion, a heavy cloak he wore under his own. His thirst was a small, dry stone in his throat, but the coolness of the forest was a brief and blessed gift. It was a gentle hand on his hot forehead. The road continued, a dark ribbon winding through the ancient trees. The journey was not over, but the day was beginning to think about its end. The forest was a long, cool dream. He walked through its green twilight, a solitary ghost on a path of moss and shadow. The air was a tonic, a cool drink for his weary lungs. For a time, the urgent fire of his message seemed to sleep, lulled by the deep, green quiet. He heard the whisper of the wind in the high pines, a sound like a distant sea. He heard the faint, secret rustle of a mouse in the dry leaves. These were the only sounds in this ancient, living cathedral. But the dream could not last. The forest began to thin. The trees, which had stood shoulder to shoulder like a great army, began to draw apart. The dappled sunlight on the path grew from small, scattered coins into large, warm pools of gold. The air lost its damp, earthy smell, and the dry scent of the open road returned, a familiar and demanding perfume. He stepped from the last shadow. The world opened up before him, and he was struck by the sudden, immense silence of the open sky. The sun was a great, soft orange eye sinking toward the dark line of the distant hills. Its light was a river of warm honey flowing across the land. The road, which had been a dark thread in the woods, was now a shining golden path. And there, far down that path, nestled in a gentle curve of the land, he saw it. A small town. It was just a cluster of dark rooftops and a single, thin curl of smoke rising into the violet air. But it was a destination. It was a harbour. It was the end of the day's long, weary road. The fatigue returned to his body, a heavy but welcome weight. The forest had been a respite, but this sight was a promise. The journey had almost reached its end. The sight of the town was a magnet, pulling him forward. Each step now was easier than the last. The road, which had been a lonely and indifferent companion, seemed to soften under his feet. It was a path that wanted him to arrive. The golden light of the setting sun was a blessing. It bathed the weary world in a gentle, forgiving glow. The hills were no longer obstacles, but soft, sleeping shoulders hunched against the cooling sky. As he drew closer, the land began to change. The wild fields gave way to neat, tended plots of earth, their work for the day done. He passed a small, forgotten shrine by the side of the road, a place for a traveller to leave a silent prayer of thanks for a safe journey. He could smell the town now, It was not the sharp, chaotic perfume of the great city. It was the smell of home. The scent of wood smoke from 100 evening fires was a rich and comforting blanket. It mingled with the warm, honest smell of baking bread and the savory promise of roasting meat. These were the smells of rest, of replenishment. The silence of the open road began to fill with the soft, muted sounds of a community settling for the night. A dog barked, its voice a friendly, domestic sound in the vast quiet. The lowing of cattle being brought into a warm, dark barn. The distant, sweet laughter of a child. His own footsteps, which had been the only sound for so long, now joined this gentle chorus. He reached the first house. Its stone walls were warm from the day's sun. Through a single, unshuttered window, he saw the flicker of a lamp, a tiny captured star, a world of warmth and light in the growing twilight. The road had brought him here. Its long, hard promise was fulfilled. He stood at the edge of the town, a traveller at the gate, ready to be enfolded in its quiet, human warmth. He walked into the town's warm embrace. The great road, which had been his entire world, narrowed and became a simple street of worn, familiar stones. The sky, once a vast and empty canvas, was now just a deep, violet ceiling above the rooftops. Light spilled from open doorways, painting soft, golden rectangles on the dusty ground. He heard the murmur of families at their evening meal, the sound a gentle and comforting river flowing around him. He saw a sign ahead, a crudely painted horse, its colors faded by years of sun and rain. A small lamp hung beneath it, its flame a welcoming beacon in the growing dark. From the open door of the inn came a wave of warmth and noise. It was the sound of tired men talking, of clay mugs being set on wooden tables, of a lute being played softly in a corner. He stepped inside. The air was thick with the smells of life. Spilled ale, hot stew, and the sharp, clean scent of wood smoke from a great stone hearth. After a day of silence, the simple human noise was a balm. He was no longer a solitary messenger, a single point of purpose in a vast landscape. He was just a man, a tired, thirsty man at the end of a long day. He found an empty space on a bench in the corner. He set down the leather pouch containing his message. It landed on the wood with a soft, final thud. A serving girl brought him a clay mug of dark ale. He held it in both hands, feeling its coolness, then its warmth. He drank deeply. The day's dust was washed from his throat. The long miles, the hot sun, the cool forest, they all fell away. The great road was a forgotten memory. The journey was done. The only thing left was the deep, dreamless rest that was waiting for him. A quiet harbour at the end of the world. The ale was cool and dark and tasted of the earth. He took another long, slow swallow. A bowl of thick, hot stew was placed before him. The steam that rose from it was a small, fragrant cloud, smelling of root vegetables and savoury meat. He ate slowly, his movements heavy, his spoon a weight in his tired hand. The food was not a taste so much as it was a warmth, a deep and honest comfort that spread through his weary body, extinguishing the last embers of the day's long effort. The noise of the common room was a gentle, rolling tide. It washed over him without touching him. The lute in the corner played a simple, wandering tune, a melody with no beginning and no end. The voices of the other men were a low murmur, the sound of bees in a distant clover field. They were not telling stories of great adventure. They were speaking of weather, of crops, of the price of wine in the next town. They were the small, quiet words of tired men. The fire in the hearth was a living, breathing creature of orange and red. It threw soft, dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. It was a warm heart in the cool body of the evening. The courier watched the flames. His thoughts, which had been as sharp and straight as the road he travelled, now softened and began to drift. The urgent message in his pouch was no longer a fire. It was a cool, smooth stone. It could wait. For now, there was only the heavy, welcome weight of his own body. There was the rough texture of the wooden bench beneath him. There was the warmth of the fire on his face. The world had shrunk to the size of this room. The great empire, the long road, the distant city, they were all forgotten dreams. There was only this bench, this fire, this deep and profound weariness, a weariness that was a kind of peace. His eyes grew heavy. The lute music blurred. The voices faded into a single, soothing hum. He was a ship that had finally reached its harbor, its sails lowered, its anchor set deep in the quiet mud of the night. The lute player in the corner finally let his hands fall silent. The last note, a soft and gentle thing, hung in the warm air for a moment, and then dissolved into the quiet hum of the dying fire. The common room was emptying. One by one, the tired men pushed themselves up from the benches, their movements slow and heavy. They were shadows moving through the flickering firelight, each one carrying the weight of his own long day. They disappeared up the narrow wooden stairs, their footsteps a soft, retreating drumbeat, leaving behind the ghosts of their quiet conversations. The innkeeper barred the heavy front door. The sound of the thick wooden beams settling into its brackets was a deep and final sigh. It was the sound of the world being locked out for the night. The room, which had been a small harbour of life, was now just a space of growing shadows and fading warmth. The great fire in the hearth drew a final deep breath, its bright flames collapsing into a glowing bed of soft, red embers. In a small, simple room upstairs, the courier was already lost. He lay on a straw mattress that smelled of dust and dry summers. The leather pouch with its urgent message lay on the floor beside him, a forgotten stone at the bottom of a deep, dark well. His journey, his purpose, his very name had all been washed away by the slow, warm tide of sleep. He was no longer a messenger. He was just a body at rest, a single, quiet note in the great, silent symphony of the night. The small town was an island in a vast and silent sea of darkness. The inn, its last fire now a bed of cold grey ash, was the island's quiet heart. The murmur of tired men had faded into the deep and dreamless sleep of the travellers upstairs. The innkeeper himself, his long day finally done, was a shadow moving through the gloom, heading for his own small bed. The last lamp in the town flickered once, a tiny golden tear, and then went out. The town pulled the night around itself like a familiar heavy blanket. The narrow streets, which had been pathways of soft light and warm smells, were now rivers of deep, cool shadow. The moonlight, a thin silver wash, could not reach the stones here. It only touched the high, crooked rooftops, painting them with a ghostly, ethereal light. A single cat, a silent hunter with eyes of green fire, flowed like liquid shadow across a garden wall, the only living thing to witness the town's complete surrender to the night. The air grew colder. It smelled of damp stone and the faint, sweet scent of hay from the small barns behind the houses. The warm, human smells of bread and stew had been tucked away behind bolted doors. The world belonged to the cold and the quiet now, and beyond the last house, where the town dissolved back into the wild fields, the great road waited. It was a pale and patient ghost, its purpose forgotten, its long journey paused. It listened to the town's slow, sleeping breath, a silent guardian waiting for the first hint of a dawn that was still 1,000 miles away. The night was now a great, deep river, and the sleeping town was just a single, small stone on its lightless bottom. 1,000 miles away, the great city was another stone, larger and more complex, but just as still, just as silent. The man of the house, his day of legal battles a forgotten dream, slept in his fine bed. The courier, his urgent message a cold, dead weight in his room, slept on his rough straw mat. The soldier on the far northern wall, the farmer in his simple hut, the sailor dreaming of the shore, all were submerged in the same profound and democratic darkness. The empire was no longer a thing of power and noise, it was a geography of sleep. Its roads were the silent silver veins on a sleeping giant. Its cities were the still, dark pools in a sleeping forest. The moon, a high and lonely shepherd, watched over this vast, silent flock. It saw the neat lines of the vineyards, their leaves turned to silver under its gaze. It saw the great, dark blotches of the forests where secrets older than the empire itself were kept in the deep and patient quiet. The air itself was asleep. It did not stir. It held the cold scent of stone and the faint, sweet smell of water from the high mountain snows. It was the breath of the world, held in a long and peaceful pause. There were no borders now. The worries of the day, the ambitions, the fears, the small bright joys, all had dissolved. There was only the land and the sky and the great connecting web of the roads. The world had returned to a simpler time, a time before men and their frantic purposes. It was a landscape of pure being, a silent poem written in moonlight and shadow. Everything waited, everything rested. The great heart of the world was beating so slowly, so softly, you could no longer hear it. You could only feel it, a deep and steady rhythm, a promise that after this long, perfect rest, the dawn would come again. The moon is a silent witness. It looks down upon a world that has forgotten itself. It sees the great city, a collection of stones that has forgotten its own name. It sees the long roads, veins of silver that have forgotten the endless traffic of their days. It sees the faces of the sleepers, the man of wealth in his soft bed, the courier on his straw mat, the soldier on his cold rampart. Their faces are smooth, unwritten pages. The worries and ambitions that carved lines upon them during the day have been washed away by the gentle tide of the night. There are no rich men now. There are no poor men. There are no masters, no servants, no victors, no vanquished. There are only sleepers. The empire is no longer an idea. It is a shared breath, a single, slow, deep exhalation that rises to meet the cold, distant stars. All the day's frantic questions have been answered with a simple, profound silence. All the day's bright, sharp colors have bled into a single, soft, and limitless black. The world is a held note, a perfect and unending moment of peace. Let that peace find you now. Let the memory of the story fade. The names, the places, the struggles, they are all just dust motes in a forgotten sunbeam. There is only the darkness, a warm and heavy blanket. There is only the silence, a deep and calming sea. Let yourself sink into it. Let the last of your thoughts dissolve like salt in water. There is nothing left to hold on to. There is only the slow, easy fall into the deep, dreamless, and perfect quiet. The quiet at the bottom of the world. Rest now, sleep. The memory of the world is a fading echo. The great city has dissolved into the darkness. The long roads have melted into the silent land. The small inn is a forgotten dream. The faces of the sleepers, the man in his bed, the courier on his mat, have all been washed clean by the deep and gentle river of the night. There is nothing left to see, there is nothing left to hear. The story is over, the last word has been spoken, the silence is now complete. It is a soft and heavy blanket of velvet, warm and dark. It covers everything, it covers the sleeping empire, it covers you. There is only the slow, easy rhythm of your own breathing, a gentle tide pulling you away from the shore of the world. Let it take you. There is no resistance now, there is no thought. There is only the feeling of sinking into a deep and comfortable warmth, sinking into a perfect and profound peace, deeper and deeper. Let go of the last thread, let it all drift away. There is only this quiet. this darkness, this deep and final rest. Sleep now, sleep, sleep. The last word has faded into the silence. The last image has dissolved into the dark. There is nothing left of the story now. Not a whisper, not a ghost. The great city is gone, the long roads are gone, the world itself is a forgotten dream. Let it all drift away. Let the memory of it become a soft and distant cloud, a cloud that melts into a clear and empty sky. There is only the quiet now, a quiet so deep it has no end. There is only the darkness, a darkness so soft it feels like a warm blanket. Let the quiet fill you. Let the darkness hold you. There is nothing to do. There is nowhere to go. There is only the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing, a gentle wave rising and falling, a soft and easy tide carrying you out to a calm and silent sea. Each breath pulls you deeper, deeper into the peace, deeper into the rest. Feel the last of your thoughts unmoor. Feel them drift away like tiny, silent boats into the vast and empty ocean of the night. You are floating now, drifting now, sinking now, down into the soft, warm quiet, down into the deep, dark peace, down into the final dreamless sleep, deeper and deeper and deeper still. There is only this gentle falling, this quiet surrender. Sleep,